Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Blood Moon, the last game of the hunter. The woods had always held a certain allure for me, a promise of adventure wrapped in whispers of danger. Ever since I was a boy, I had been captivated by my father's hunting stories, vivid tales of moonlit nights spent tracking elusive prey through shadowy thickets. The thrill he described, the rush of adrenaline as a deer leaped from its hiding place, was something I wanted to experience for myself. After years of begging, my father finally agreed to take me on my first real hunt, an initiation into a world that felt both exhilarating and unnerving. We arrived at the cabin just before dusk, the air thick with humidity and the sweet scent of pine. My father unloaded the gear while I observed the surrounding forest, a labyrinth of darkened trees stretching endlessly into the gloom. It felt alive, breathing with an energy that both fascinated and frightened me. I had always understood that nature was a powerful force, but now, standing at the threshold of this wild domain, I felt a deep-rooted instinct stirring within me, a primal call that echoed in my bones. "Are you ready for this?" my father asked, his voice gruff yet filled with an excitement that made my heart race. I nodded, my throat dry with anticipation. After a quick dinner, we reviewed our gear, checking rifles and sharpening knives. My father spoke of safety and respect for the animals we were hunting, but I could sense the thrill coursing through him as he shared stories of past hunts. Each tale heightened my desire to prove myself, to earn my place in this age-old tradition. As the sun dipped below the treetops, we set out into the woods, the flashlight beams cutting through the gathering darkness. The rustling of underbrush beneath our feet was the only sound accompanying us, a rhythmic crunch that blended with the distant calls of night creatures awakening from their daytime slumber. My heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement, the forest's vastness surrounding us like an ancient, watchful entity. My father led the way, his steps sure and deliberate. I followed closely, trying to match his pace, feeling the weight of the rifle slung across my shoulder. As we ventured deeper, the trees loomed larger, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes against the indigo sky. Each creak and whisper in the wind sent shivers along my spine, yet I was determined not to show any signs of fear. We settled near a clearing that my father claimed was a known deer crossing. He instructed me to remain silent and alert while he checked the area for signs of life. I scanned the shadows, my eyes straining against the darkness, adrenaline surging with every rustle. Time stretched, and I focused on my breathing, eager for something, anything, to break the stillness. Hours slipped by, the silence becoming oppressive, the weight of the night pressing down on my shoulders. Just as doubt began to seep in, a gentle rustle broke the air. My heart leaped, and I turned to my father, who signaled for me to be still. We both focused on the sound, a low crackling that seemed to come from the underbrush ahead. Then I saw it, a flash of movement, a glimmer of fur. The dark shape was elusive, darting through the trees, too quick for me to identify. But my father's expression was one of unmasked excitement. He raised his rifle, training it on the direction of the movement, and I held my breath, feeling the tension build in the air around us. The rustling intensified, and in that moment, an overwhelming sensation washed over me. A feeling that we were not alone. It was a primal instinct that curled itself around my heart, tightening with every second. My father's focus remained unwavering, but I felt a creeping unease, as if something deeper than the hunt was stirring in the shadows. "Stay close," he whispered, lowering his rifle slightly but still alert. I could see the muscles in his jaw tense as he surveyed the darkened landscape ahead of us. I nodded, but I felt the urge to explore the edges of our clearing, to peer into the darkness that seemed to pulse with life. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, a cold prickle creeping over my skin. I could sense something lurking beyond the veil of trees, something that was not merely a deer. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just the wind," he replied, although his gaze remained locked on the shadows. But as he said it, I saw movement once more, an outline shifting against the blackness, too large to be a deer. My breathing quickened, and I squinted into the gloom, searching for clarity. My father finally turned, catching my anxious eye. "What did you see?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Something big." His face hardened, and he swept the rifle around, scanning the perimeter with hardened resolve. "We should head back." But before we could make a move, a low growl echoed from the depths of the trees, sending a chill down my spine. It was not the sound of any animal I recognized, a guttural sound that lingered in the air like a warning. My heart pounded against my ribs as I exchanged a terrified glance with my father. "Stay close," he repeated, his grip tightening around the rifle. We began to retreat slowly, the path behind us shrouded in uncertainty and dread. The sensation of being hunted settled over me like a heavy cloak, and I realized with horror that our roles had shifted. We were no longer the predators, we were the prey. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting an eerie glow over the forest floor. I had always considered myself a seasoned outdoorsman, but as I stood there, a cold knot twisted in my stomach. The events from yesterday had shaken me more than I cared to admit. The town's whispers of a dark history haunted me, each one echoing in my mind like the distant sound of a gunshot. I had come to Woodridge Woods for solitude, to escape the monotony of city life and immerse myself in nature. But the peace I sought eluded me. I thought about the old man at the general store who had spoken of the woods as if they were alive, a predator lurking beneath the surface. I had brushed him off, but his words replayed in my memory with unsettling clarity. As I ventured deeper into the thicket, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwining like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. Every crack of a twig beneath my boots sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered the distant sound of a rifle shot yesterday and the feeling of being watched. The thought made me pick up the pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I followed a narrow path that promised to lead to a small clearing, a place I could set up my camp for the night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder of the life and death that thrived in these woods. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to appear behind me. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. Reaching the clearing, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was an idyllic spot, surrounded by towering pines, with a small stream trickling nearby. I set to work, pitching my tent and gathering firewood. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that danced between the trees. As darkness enveloped the woods, I kindled a fire, its flames flickering like the heartbeat of the forest. I pulled out my map to plan the next day's hunt, but my thoughts drifted. I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I glanced around, half expecting to see a figure lurking just beyond the trees, but the night held its secrets tightly. That's when I heard it, a soft rustle, almost imperceptible, coming from the thicket. My heart raced, and I felt the instinctual urge to reach for the hunting knife strapped to my belt. I strained my ears to listen, trying to differentiate between the sounds of wildlife and something more sinister. Was it merely a deer, or was the woods concealing something darker? The rustling grew closer, and a chill ran down my spine. I stood slowly, straining to see through the gloom. Then I caught sight of something, a flash of movement among the underbrush. It was too quick to identify, my mind racing with possibilities. I was aware of the stories, hunters disappearing, strange footprints left behind, and the whispers of a shadow that roamed these woods. But surely, it was just my imagination, right? I had to remind myself that fear can conjure the most vivid horrors. Eventually, the forest settled back into an uneasy silence. I tried to dismiss my unease, attributing it to fatigue from the day's hike. I settled beside the fire, its warmth providing a comfort I desperately needed. As I prepared to eat, I kept the knife close, convinced it would ward off whatever threats lurked in the dark. The fire crackled, sparks flying into the night, and I began to relax. I pulled out my notebook, determined to record my observations. The woods, despite their foreboding aura, held a beauty I wanted to capture. I scribbled down details of the flora and fauna around me, but my thoughts were interrupted once more by that rustle. This time, it was accompanied by a low, almost mournful sound, a whisper that seemed to weave through the trees. I froze, the pen falling from my fingers. I strained to listen, my pulse quickening. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The woods swallowed my words, leaving only the echo of their absence. No answer came. I waited, the silence pressing against my ears, every instinct screaming at me to flee. Gathering my courage, I stood and called again, louder this time. "Is anyone there?" The words felt foolish as they left my lips, and I immediately regretted breaking the stillness. In response, the rustling intensified, a chaotic thrashing in the brush that sent a surge of adrenaline through me. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on as I stepped toward the sound. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating nothing but underbrush and darkness. I felt exposed, vulnerable, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Then, abruptly, the sound ceased. An oppressive silence blanketed the area, and I hesitated. My mind raced with possibilities: an animal, perhaps, or another hunter. But the stories I had heard flickered in the back of my mind like a warning sign. Unease wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I turned back to the fire, its warmth fading as a chill swept through the clearing. I sat back down, heart hammering in my chest, wrestling with the urge to flee. I told myself it was just wildlife, maybe a deer startled by my presence. But the woods felt alive, breathing with an intensity that gnawed at my rational thoughts. The fire flickered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond. The night stretched on, and I forced myself to eat, chewing each bite with a sense of dread. Each sound, each whisper, felt amplified by the oppressive stillness. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, taunting me with their secrecy. As I finished, I made a decision: I wouldn't sleep tonight. Not here. Not with the uncertainty lurking just out of sight. The fire crackled, and I stoked it, the flames casting long shadows that flickered like ghosts. I listened, every rustle in the underbrush igniting a primal fear. The stories of hunters who had disappeared echoed in my mind as I sat there, waiting for dawn. The dark woods felt like a trap, and as the hours wore on, I wondered if I would be the next story told in Woodridge Woods. The sun barely crested the horizon when I stepped outside, the chill of the morning air biting through my layers. Though I had lived in these woods my entire life, they felt foreign now, their shadows deeper, more menacing. I tightened the straps of my worn backpack, filled with the essentials: a compass, a map that had seen better days, and a small survival kit I had meticulously packed after hearing the haunting tales that echoed through our community. This wasn't just another hunt, it was a pilgrimage into the heart of something sinister. The previous evening, I had sat by the fire with my brother, Tom, listening to him recount the story of Old Man Henderson. According to him, the old man had vanished a decade ago while hunting. They found his gear scattered, a bloody jacket snagged on a tree branch, but there was no trace of him. The locals whispered about the peculiar shapes spotted in the woods at dusk, creatures that lurked just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. I had brushed off the tales as drunken ramblings until my brother insisted that those who ignored the warnings rarely returned the same. As I set off down the familiar trail, the foliage crunched beneath my boots, a sound so mundane yet somehow amplified in the silence surrounding me. The trees, tall and gnarled, loomed like specters, their skeletal branches reaching out as if trying to ensnare me. My heart raced at the thought of what might be out there, but the thrill of the hunt pushed me forward. The plan was simple: hike deeper into the woods than I ever had before, set up camp in a secluded clearing, and wait. The animals were dense where the trees thickened, and I hoped to catch something worthy of bragging rights. But the deeper I ventured, the more palpable the tension grew. By midday, I found my clearing, a perfect spot surrounded by aged oaks. I unpacked, setting up my small tent and fire pit. In the flicker of the small flame, I felt a semblance of comfort, but it was fleeting. The air hummed with an underlying tension, as if the woods held their breath, waiting for something to unfold. As dusk approached, I ventured out with my bow and a quiver of arrows. The woods were alive with the chorus of nature, yet there was an odd undercurrent, a whisper of something amiss. I settled against a tree and closed my eyes, letting the tranquility wash over me, only to be interrupted by a rustling sound. I jolted upright, heart pounding against my rib cage. My breath quickened as I strained to listen. It was far off, perhaps a deer or a rabbit, but instinct told me to remain vigilant. I waited, the shadows lengthening around me, deepening into something palpable, something I no longer recognized. Just as the last rays of sunlight vanished, I heard it again, a snap, then a soft thud. My gaze darted to the tree limb, where I could make out the silhouettes dancing in the growing darkness. A low growl reverberated through the stillness, and my skin prickled. This wasn't a deer. I rose quietly, heart thudding in my ears, and slowly circled the clearing, aware of every rustle and breeze. My instinct screamed at me to return to my tent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Just then, a shadow darted between the trees, swift and silent. I gripped my bow tighter, the tension palpable. The growl intensified, now a low snarl that seemed to echo off the trees. I peered into the darkness, straining my eyes to catch a glimpse of whatever lay hidden. Suddenly, the underbrush erupted as a figure lunged toward me, its movement unfathomably fast. I released an arrow instinctively. It flew through the air, embedding itself into the trunk of a tree with a dull thud. In that terrifying moment, the shape halted, silhouetted against the fading light. It was a large creature, its eyes reflecting an unnatural glow. My mind raced as I recognized its form. The stories hadn't been mere fantasies, they had been warnings, and I had foolishly walked into the lair of the beast that haunted the woods. It was then I heard a second growl, deeper and more menacing, and from the shadows emerged another creature, its presence towering and formidable. Terrors I had never imagined flooded my thoughts. I staggered back, realizing with horror that I was not alone. More shapes emerged, filling the clearing. Panic surged through me as I turned, sprinting back toward my tent. Branches clawed at my skin, and the snapping of twigs echoed behind me, relentless. I stumbled and fell, but scrambled back up, adrenaline pumping fiercely. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. They were close behind, their breath like hot wind against my neck. I reached my tent, frantically clawing at the zipper, my hands quaking. The moment I slipped inside, I shoved the flap closed, breathing heavily. The world beyond felt alive, shadows shifting, waiting. I glanced around, darkness closing in on me, the only sound my ragged breathing. My heart thundered in my chest as I fumbled for my flashlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were just outside, their eyes boring into the fabric, waiting patiently, hungry. With a deep breath, I fumbled to switch on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, trembling as I directed it toward the tent flap. The shadows outside shifted, dancing with sinister intent. I could feel them, could almost hear their thoughts. They were hunting me now. The woods had changed. I had come seeking a simple thrill, but I was now trapped in an ancient game of a predator and its prey. The darkness was alive, and I was its target. The moon hung low in the sky, a ghostly sliver casting a pale sheen across the forest floor. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees loomed around me, their gnarled branches like twisted fingers reaching out, eager to snatch me into their dark embrace. It was a familiar sight, yet it felt foreign, tainted with an unsettling energy that seemed to pulse through the underbrush. The previous day still lingered at the edges of my mind like a half-remembered nightmare. My father had taken me hunting, as he had done countless times before. But this trip had felt different. The woods had whispered warnings that I had chosen to ignore. I remembered his laughter, the way it echoed against the bark of the ancient trees, and how it morphed into something darker, an echo of dread that gnawed at my nerves. We had set out early, our gear slung over shoulders, the weight of our rifles comforting in its familiarity. My father, a seasoned hunter, had enchanted me with stories of his youth, of the beasts that roamed these woods and the thrill of the chase. But beneath his enthusiasm, I sensed an undercurrent of unease. Something had shifted in the forest, and I could feel it in my bones. As twilight descended, my father's demeanor shifted. His voice lost its buoyancy, replaced by a tense silence that hung between us like fog. We wandered further into the woods, my heart racing with both excitement and an inexplicable dread. He had instructed me to remain close, a warning hidden in the depth of his eyes. I had nearly lost track of time when we stumbled upon a clearing surrounded by thick ferns and bramble. The ground was scarred, as though something large had recently passed through. My father knelt to inspect the ground, his brow furrowed in concentration. I watched, uncertain, noticing how the shadows deepened around him, swallowing the light that dared to trespass. A sense of foreboding settled over me. "Look here," he said, pointing at strange markings in the dirt, deep gouges that seemed to form a circle. My heart sank. I had heard the stories of lost souls and creatures said to dwell in these woods. Legends of hunters who had ventured too far and never returned. I had brushed them aside as mere tales meant to scare children. Yet, standing there, I felt the weight of those stories pressing against my chest, stifling my breath. "Dad, can we go back?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. His gaze remained fixed on the markings. "Just a little longer," he replied, his voice distant, lost in the woods. Before I could protest, a rustling sound broke the stillness, a sharp crack like a twig snapping underfoot. My father straightened, eyes narrowing. The forest held its breath, and I could almost hear my own pulse echoing in my ears. "What was that?" I breathed, searching the shadows for movement. "Probably just a deer," he said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his tone. He raised his rifle, scanning the tree line, the tension in his body palpable. The air had turned electric, thick with something unspeakable, something that gnawed at the edges of my sanity. The rustling grew louder, closer, a primal sound that sent shivers cascading down my spine. My father motioned for me to stay put, his eyes darting about with a frantic urgency. I felt like a child again, lost and frightened in the dark, clinging to the remnants of my father's confidence as he moved deeper into the underbrush, a shadow against the twilight. Minutes passed in silence, stretching into an eternity. I stood alone, heart racing, every instinct screaming for me to run. The woods had transformed, no longer a playground but a prison, every shadow lurking with hidden malice. Before I could turn to follow my father, a low growl emerged from the depths of the forest, primal and menacing. I froze, fear wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. I strained to listen, the growl reverberating like thunder. It was not a deer. It was something far more sinister. Panic surged through me as I called for my father, my voice trembling. "Dad, where are you?" The silence that followed was deafening. I stumbled forward, the light fading, my surroundings morphing into indistinct shapes. Then I saw two glowing eyes piercing the darkness, the silhouette of a large creature blending seamlessly with the shadows. It moved with a grace that belied its size, watching me with an intensity that rooted me to the spot. I was not an intruder in this realm, I was prey. A surge of adrenaline propelled me back, my instinct screaming at me to escape. I turned and fled, the ground uneven beneath my feet, crashing through the underbrush and branches that snagged at my clothes like claws. I could hear it behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, gaining on me. I burst into the clearing, the moonlight spilling across the ground like spilled ink. I could see my father's rifle lying abandoned in the grass, but he was nowhere to be found. I screamed for him again, my voice echoing against the stillness. The forest answered with silence, thick and suffocating. The creature emerged from the darkness, its form monstrous and twisted, eyes glimmering with hunger. In that moment, my heart felt as if it would shatter, the realization crashing over me like a wave. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare with a predator that hunted not just for sport, but for something more sinister. In that instant, the stories my father told, the warnings whispered in the dark, came rushing back to me, a flood of chilling clarity. I had thought them mere tales, but now I understood the price of ignorance. I was not just a witness to horror, I was its latest victim. The creature lunged, and I bolted into the depths of the forest, praying that I could outpace the darkness that loomed behind me. I had to find my father, had to escape this living nightmare, but as the branches whipped against my skin, I realized the truth, the hunt had only just begun. As dawn broke over the horizon, the woods appeared ethereal, shrouded in mist that hung low like a specter waiting to strike. I felt a chill travel down my spine, something was amiss. I had come to these woods searching for answers, but instead, I found fear lurking among the trees. The previous night's events played over in my mind like a grainy film reel. The echoes of whispered voices and the rustle of leaves had haunted my sleep, twisting my dreams into nightmares. I set out with a resolve that faltered under the weight of the forest's silence. Each step felt heavy, like walking through a world that had not seen life in ages. The air was thick with uncertainty, the once familiar trails twisting into a labyrinth of shadows. I gripped my hunting knife tightly, its cold steel a meager comfort against the encroaching dread. I hadn't come here to hunt a monster, but that was how it felt in the aftermath of last night's encounter. I had always assumed hunting was about the thrill of the chase, the precision of the shot. Yet here I was, far from the comfort of my city life, grappling with the understanding that I was just as much prey as I was hunter. The thought was suffocating. A rustle in the underbrush snapped my focus, and I froze. My heart raced, anticipation and fear weaving together like a twisted vine. I drew the knife from its sheath, the blade gleaming in the soft morning light. I strained to see through the trees, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The woods felt alive, breathing around me, every crackle of twigs and flutter of leaves sending shivers through my body. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement darting between the trees. Was it a deer? Or something else? I edged closer, driven by a mix of instinct and curiosity. My breath hung in the damp air as I moved stealthily, following the movement deeper into the thicket. The forest grew denser, the sunlight barely penetrating the canopy overhead. Shadows stretched grotesquely, twisting and writhing at the edges of my vision. The rustling continued, seemingly just out of sight, leading me further into the gloom. I could feel the atmosphere shift, the air thickening with an unspoken tension. Suddenly, the underbrush parted, and I stumbled into a small clearing bathed in pale light. My breath caught in my throat. At the center lay a crude altar, made of rocks and sticks, scattered with remnants of what once was feathers, bones, and the unmistakable hint of something darker. My mind screamed that this was wrong. Something vile had taken root here. This was no ordinary hunting ground. I stepped back instinctively, but the crunch of a twig betrayed my presence. I turned quickly, but not before I caught sight of a figure lurking at the edge of the trees. It was tall and gaunt, shrouded in a tattered coat that blended seamlessly with the forest. I couldn't see its face, but the eyes, glinting like twin shards of obsidian, pierced through the veil of shadows. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the eerie stillness. The figure didn't respond, merely watching me with an unsettling intensity. I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing on my chest, suffocating me under its scrutiny. I took a step backward, urgency clawing at my instincts. "Get away from here," I shouted, desperation filling my voice. It was clear I was not welcome among the trees, and yet something pulled me to stay, to understand what this presence wanted. It stepped closer, moving with a fluid grace that belied its menacing appearance. I raised my knife, fingers trembling as I faced the unknown threat, but the figure only paused, tilting its head as if contemplating my very existence. "Leave," it finally said, the voice low and gravelly, echoing through the clearing like a mournful breeze. "This is not your place." With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran, the earth rushing beneath my feet as I navigated back through the forest's maze. Branches clawed at my skin, and I could hear the whispering of the woods growing louder, a cacophony of warnings that urged me to escape. I felt the pull of the figure's gaze, a haunting reminder that I was not alone, that something in these woods had been watching me, perhaps even hunting me. I burst through the underbrush and emerged onto the main path, panting as I stumbled into the faint light of the day. But even as relief washed over me, I felt an unseen weight settle on my shoulders, the sense that I was still being followed. My heart pounded in my ears, the echo of the figure's warning reverberating in my mind. I was an intruder in a world where the rules of nature twisted like the shadows that crept among the trees. After last night, I had expected answers, but all I had found was fear. I had come searching for the thrill of the hunt, yet I now understood that I was the hunted. Determination surged within me, a flicker of defiance against the darkness. I would uncover the truth of this place, no matter the cost. No longer merely a participant in this game of survival, I would become the hunter once more. The forest was alive with secrets, and I was ready to unearth them even if it meant facing the figure that lurked within the shadows. Story 2, Voices in the Night Woods. The sun dipped below the horizon as we set up camp. A cool breeze rustled through the tall pines surrounding us, whispering secrets I was too eager to ignore. My friends, Jake and Lila, transformed the clearing into a makeshift home for the weekend, their jests and laughter echoing through the trees. I fought to suppress a growing unease that settled in my gut, an instinct born from countless horror stories that had painted camping in a sinister light. We pitched the tent, its bright orange fabric a stark contrast against the darkening woods. As the last peg was hammered into the ground, I stepped back to survey our work. The forest loomed, its shadows stretching like fingers, intruding our little sanctuary. "You okay, Mia?" Jake asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, though my voice wavered slightly. I was more than fine, I was excited. Camping was supposed to be fun, a chance to disconnect from reality, to enjoy nature. But as darkness crept in, I recalled the stories I heard as a child, children vanishing in the woods, haunted by creatures that prowled under the cover of night. Lila placed a hand on my shoulder. "You sure you're not scared?" she teased, a playful glint in her eyes. "Of course not. Just thinking." I forced a laugh. The three of us gathered around the fire pit, the flickering flames illuminating our faces. As Jake fumbled with the matches, I collected a few twigs and logs nearby, hoping to distract myself from my growing anxiety. The crackling fire soon chased the darkness back, its warmth enveloping us like a blanket. "You know," Jake began as he tossed another log into the blaze, "I heard a story about this place. They say a family went missing in these woods decades ago." I shot him a glare, already weary of ghost stories on the first night. "Come on, Jake. It's true." They used to camp here every summer. One night, they just vanished. He leaned in, his eyes glinting in the firelight. They found their tent untouched, like they just disappeared into thin air. Lila rolled her eyes but didn't seem entirely unconcerned. The firelight cast dancing shadows around us, making the trees appear to sway ominously. The stories I had dismissed earlier began to swirl in my mind, creeping beneath my skin. "Stop it," I said, trying to sound brave. "You're scaring me." Fine, fine, Jake relented, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "No more ghost stories. Let's make some s'mores instead." We toasted marshmallows and shared stories, laughter mingling with the crackling of the flames. Time slipped by, and eventually, the fire dwindled to a soft glow, an orange halo among the oppressive darkness. I could no longer ignore the chill creeping up my spine. A rustle in the underbrush caught my attention, and I turned, heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a murmur. "Hear what?" Lila asked, her brow furrowing. "Nothing," I said quickly, shaking my head, dismissing my own fear. I reminded myself that it was just the forest settling down for the night. As we crawled into the tent, I felt the cool earth beneath me and the thin barrier between us and the outside world. I tucked myself into my sleeping bag, the fabric feeling foreign against my skin. The air was heavy with the silence of the woods, and sleep eluded me. Hours passed, the gentle rhythm of my friend's breathing lulling me deeper into a state of half-sleep. I waited through dreams until a sudden noise jolted me awake. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping, echoed through the dark. I froze, my heart pounding as I strained to listen. "Mia?" Lila whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "I heard something," I replied, barely above a whisper. The silence that followed felt loaded, pregnant with the threat of something lurking just beyond the canvas walls of our tent. I waited, desperate for another sound, for reassurance that it was nothing. The darkness outside seemed to shift, a living entity that pressed against us. Jake stirred beside me, groggily rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "I heard a noise," I insisted. "Probably just an animal," he reassured, but not with conviction. For a moment, the darkness outside held its breath, as if it were listening for us too. Then, I heard it again, a soft rustle, followed by what sounded like a footfall. "Mia," Lila's voice trembled. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me, a futile attempt at protection. The world outside remained silent, but I could feel something waiting, lurking just at the edge of our flimsy shelter. "Maybe we should check it out," Jake suggested, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. "No," I said firmly. "Let's just wait." But the waiting became unbearable. The forest felt alive, each rustle and crack magnified in the oppressive silence. The stories flooded back, weaving together in my mind, forming a tapestry of dread that threatened to suffocate me. I closed my eyes tightly, wishing for morning, wishing to escape whatever was lurking just outside our sanctuary. The night wore on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our laughter had drawn something dark into our camp. As sleep finally claimed me, I braced for the inevitable nightmares, hoping I'd wake up with the dawn, unscathed by whatever haunted the woods. The first cracks of dawn seeped through the tight canopy of trees, casting a muted gray light into our campsite. I had barely slept, a nightmare of shadows and whispers dancing just beyond the edges of my consciousness. I could still feel the remnants of fear crawling under my skin as I stirred awake, the world outside my tent muffled and foreign. The sound of rustling leaves and distant twigs snapping sent a shiver down my spine, though the birds had begun to sing their early morning songs, seemingly unaware of the unease thick in the air. I unzipped the tent flap cautiously, half expecting to find something lurking just beyond the threshold. Instead, I was met with the soft hum of nature, the gentle rustle of the underbrush, and the sharp scent of pine needles. My friends, Sarah and Tom, were already up, their silhouettes flickering around the burgeoning campfire. The flames danced eagerly, crackling and popping as they consumed the early morning chill. "Hey, sleepyhead," Sarah called, her voice bright but tinged with something I couldn't quite pinpoint. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, rubbing my eyes as I took in the scene. Tom was stirring a pot of coffee over the fire, the rich aroma filling the air and warming my senses against the disquiet that had settled deep in my gut. "Morning," I mumbled, forcing a smile as I joined them. I could see Sarah was trying to maintain an upbeat demeanor, but her eyes betraying a lingering tension. Had she felt it too? The oppressive sensation that something was off. I shipped the thought away, focusing instead on the routine of camping, the tasks that would ground me in our shared experience. As the sun climbed higher, I felt the warmth seep into me, pushing back the chill that had clung to my bones since we'd arrived. We prepared breakfast, laughter punctuating the air, but the joy felt forced, as if we were trying to convince ourselves the forest was welcoming when it had an unsettling quality. Every time I glanced at the tree-line, I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, as if we were intruders in a world that didn't want us there. After breakfast, we decided to go for a hike. The plan was to explore the nearby trails, but a lingering hesitation kept me from fully committing to the adventure. The deeper we wandered into the woods, the more the trees seemed to close in around us, their gnarled branches twisting like fingers reaching for something just out of reach. Every rustle and crack of twigs echoed unnaturally, amplifying my anxiety. I tried to shake it off, to enjoy the beauty surrounding us, but the feeling of being observed persisted. "Did you hear that?" Tom's voice broke through my thoughts, his brow furrowed as he glanced around. It was a faint sound, almost like the wind whispering through the leaves, but there was something distinctly human about it, something unsettlingly close. I exchanged glances with Sarah, and for a moment, we were united in our shared concern. "What do you think it was?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Probably just the wind," I replied, forcing a laugh. "You know how it gets out here. It plays tricks on your mind." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. We pushed deeper into the woods, following the faint trail that wound like a snake through the underbrush. The trees began to thin, revealing a small clearing with a tranquil pond at its center. The water mirrored the sky, undisturbed and beautiful, but the sense of peace was shattered when I noticed something strange along the bank. There were signs of something having disturbed the area. The ground was torn up, and the tall grass surrounding the water had been flattened, as if something heavy had dragged itself through. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as unease crept back in, thicker and more pronounced. "Let's take a break here," Tom suggested, oblivious to my growing concern. We settled on a fallen log, its bark rough under my fingertips. As we shared snacks and stories, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Each time a bird called out, each time the wind blew a little too hard, I felt the primal urge to look over my shoulder. After some time, I stood up, deciding I needed to stretch my legs. Wandering a little further from the pond, I spotted something glinting just beyond the tree line. Curiosity tugged at me, and I approached cautiously. As I drew nearer, I realized it was a rusted metal object half buried in the ground, its edges sharp and jagged. Digging through the dirt with my hands, I unearthed a part of a broken compass. It was old, much older than any I had ever seen, and engraved with markings that looked eerily similar to runes. I turned it over, my heart racing. The compass needle flickered erratically, spinning wildly as if trying to find true north but unable to settle. I dropped it, suddenly feeling the absurd weight of dread pressing down on me. "What's that?" Sarah's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see her and Tom watching me, concern replacing their earlier lightheartedness. "Just a compass," I said, attempting to sound nonchalant. But I could see the unease mirrored in their expressions. "Let's head back," I suggested, urging them to retrace our steps. The way back felt longer, the trees closer together as if they were trying to trap us in their embrace. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had strayed too far from safety, and the forest was slowly closing in. As we reached the campsite, I felt a wave of relief. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest fell silent. The laughter and banter we had shared earlier faded into an uncomfortable hush, the only sounds the gentle crackle of the campfire and the whisper of the wind through the trees. I glanced into the shadows beyond the firelight, keenly aware that we were not alone, and I could have sworn that somewhere in the distance, I heard a low, mournful cry echo through the night, chilling my blood and solidifying my fears. We had come to escape the world, to find solace in nature, but I could feel the pulse of something dark and ancient lurking just out of sight, watching us with hungry eyes. The dawn broke with a sullen light, gray and oppressive, hanging low over the trees like a shroud. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders, feeling the dampness of the morning seep into my bones. The fire pit, which had remained cold and lifeless throughout the night, was a sobering reminder of our predicament. The woods around us, once a sanctuary of adventure, now felt like a prison cloaked in an eerie silence. Sam was the first to stir, groaning as he sat up. The remnants of yesterday's bravado had faded, replaced by a demeanor that made him look older than his 20 years. "Anyone got coffee?" he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I glanced at Mike, who was still sprawled out next to the dying embers. His face was pale, and I could see the shadows under his eyes deepening. "We should probably pack up," I suggested, my voice rough from lack of sleep. The night had been restless, haunted by the sounds of the woods, branches cracking, distant rustlings, and the occasional hoot of an owl, each noise a reminder that we were not alone. Pack? And miss out on the thrill of camping? Sam chuckled nervously, but the laughter felt forced, as if the very air around us stifled joy. "Where exactly would we go?" Mike mumbled, finally pushing himself up. His gaze drifted to the cluster of trees beyond our campsite. "We're miles from civilization." I glanced at the top of the hill in the distance, where the forest grew denser and darker. My mind wandered to the stories we had shared around the fire, tales of campers gone missing, of shadows that danced just beyond the perimeter of the light, of something waiting just out of sight. As I began to pack my gear, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold, it was an all-consuming sense of being watched, a prickling at the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. I forced myself to keep moving, shoving my sleeping bag into my backpack, but every rustle of a leaf felt like a whisper of warning. "You okay?" Sam asked, his eyes searching mine. "Yeah, I lied. Just ready to get moving." After a hurried breakfast of granola bars and lukewarm water, we packed up the campsite in uneasy silence. Each scrape of gear against the ground sounded unnaturally loud, echoing in the stillness of the morning. I glanced at Mike, who had gone pale. His eyes darted toward the trees. "We should head back the way we came," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Right," Sam agreed, but I could hear the tremble in his voice. We started down the narrow path, each step sinking into the damp earth. The forest loomed around us, trees twisted and gnarled, their branches like fingers reaching down, trying to pull us back into their depths. It was unsettling how quickly the ambience shifted from serene to sinister. As we walked, I noticed Mike lagging behind. "Everything okay back there?" I called, attempting to keep my tone light. "Yeah, just feel like I'm being followed," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. I turned to look at him, the feeling of dread creeping back in. "You're not being followed," I said, though I didn't believe it. My own heart raced as I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure lurking just out of sight. The path twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the woods instead of back towards safety. I tried to keep pace, but the shadows lengthened and the underbrush became thicker. The trees closed in, their presence oppressive. Did anyone notice that the trail's different? Sam asked, his voice high with anxiety. What do you mean? I asked, but before I could process his words, I felt an uneasy shift in the atmosphere. There should have been a fort back there, he pointed, his hand shaking. We should have passed it by now. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. What do you mean? We're just lost, that's all. Lost? Mike's tone was incredulous. We were supposed to be on the right path. I had a sinking feeling that the forest was not just playing tricks on our minds. This wasn't just a matter of poor navigation. Something felt wrong, as if the very land had conspired against us. Let's go back, I said. We'll retrace our steps. As we turned, the atmosphere thickened, wrapped around us like a vice. The trees seemed to close ranks behind us, blocking any unseen exit. I darted a glance back at the path, and my heart sank. The trail was gone, swallowed by the underbrush. We're not going to find our way back, are we? Sam's voice quivered. Stay calm, I urged, though my own voice betrayed me. Let's keep moving. But the woods were becoming a labyrinth, and each step felt like a descent into madness. Shadows flitted just beyond the periphery of my vision, and a sense of foreboding pressed down on us. The silence grew heavier, punctuated only by our shallow breaths. As we pressed forward, the air turned stale, and I felt a growing dread settle in my chest. It was the sensation of being hunted, of something lurking just out of view. Sam stumbled, nearly falling into a thicket. Something's not right, he gasped, his eyes wide. Before I could respond, a sound pierced through the silence, a low growl, like that of some wild creature. My pulse quickened, and we froze as the noise reverberated through the trees. Run! I shouted, and without thought, we took off, weaving through the trees, branches clawing at our skin. The growl morphed into a guttural roar, echoing behind us as we sprinted, panic overtaking reason. The forest had become a nightmare, and I realized the stories had been true. Something was out there, and we were not alone. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and mauve, but the glow did little to dispel the chill creeping through the woods. I sat on a fallen log, the dampness seeping through my jeans, as I stared into the growing darkness. The fire flickered, casting grotesque shadows of the trees around us, their gnarled branches resembling clawed hands reaching for something beyond the mortal realm. After Sarah's scream shattered the night, the tension among us had escalated dramatically. I had seen her face, pale and drawn, eyes white with terror. I heard something, she had said, her voice quaking. It was whispering my name. Brett, who had been laughing off the day's earlier ghost stories, seemed to lose his bravado. He glanced around, his posture rigid, eyes darting toward the treeline as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the depths of the dark. Dana, the quietest among us, had remained silent, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Let's just make sure we stay close to the fire, I suggested, trying to fill the silence that had settled over us like a heavy fog. Nothing will come near while we're lit up. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at my insides. The campsite felt wrong, an encroaching presence lingering just beyond the circle of our fading light. I eyed the woods, shadows swirling like whispers, urging me to venture into their depths. We should have gone back to the car, Brett muttered, casting a wary glance toward the path we had hiked earlier. I don't like this place. Too late for that now, I replied, forcing a grin that I hoped would mask my own unease. I tossed another log onto the fire, sparks swirling like fireflies into the air. Let's just stick together. The night stretched on, enveloping us in its uncanny embrace. We recounted stories, some mundane, others slightly more sinister, but the thrill of camaraderie dwindled with the flames. Each crackle of the fire seemed a reminder of our vulnerability, a warning that we were very much alone in the wilderness. When the shadows deepened, I felt an unshakable urge to investigate. "I'll be right back," I announced, standing up, intent on examining the perimeter of our campsite. The others shot me incredulous looks, but the urge to conquer the creeping dread coiled tightly in my gut drove me forward. "Don't go far," Sarah called after me, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, though I barely heard her. I needed to confront whatever was lurking, whatever had sent a shiver down my spine. I moved beyond the light of the fire, and the air turned cold, sending a shudder through me. The woods were an impenetrable mass of silhouettes, branches scratching against one another like whispers of secrets I wasn't meant to hear. As I ventured deeper, the sounds of the campsite faded until the only noise was the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. "Hello?" I called, my voice almost swallowed by the eerie stillness. No response. I ventured further, curiosity pulling me like a moth to a flame. Perhaps I could shed light on Sarah's fears, quench the anxiety that seemed to cling to us all. As I walked, I felt eyes on me. The sensation prickled my skin, goosebumps rising along my arms. I glanced around, but there was nothing, just trees with their twisted limbs, moonlight casting a silver sheen over their bark. Maybe I was losing my mind. Perhaps the fear had become too overwhelming, too palpable, blurring the lines of reality. I turned to head back, but the darkness felt thicker, as if it had taken shape, wrapping tendrils around my legs. That was when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I nearly missed it. My heart raced, thrumming loudly in my ears. I strained to listen, an instinct screaming at me to flee. "Help me!" It came again, the voice trailing off like a wisp of smoke. I couldn't pinpoint its origin. It was all around me, a disembodied plea for salvation. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. In the stillness, a shadow flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned, heart in my throat, but saw nothing. Panic burgeoned, and I rushed back the way I came, pushing through the underbrush as branches snagged at my clothes like skeletal hands. When I burst back into the flickering glow of our fire, my friends were staring at me, eyes wide with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Where were you?" Dana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard something," I stammered, trying to catch my breath. I think something's out there." Their faces twisted in disbelief, and I felt like a fool. But the memory of that voice clung to me, a haunting echo reverberating in my mind. Before I could explain further, a sharp crack resonated from the woods, a sound like a branch being broken, reverberating with a sickening finality. We all froze, eyes turning toward the darkness where the noise had originated. "Maybe it's just a deer," Brett suggested weakly, but even he couldn't mask the tremor in his tone. Then came the rustling, branches moving in a way that felt deliberate, unnatural. My heart raced, and dread coiled tight, paralyzing me. "Let's go," I urged, grabbing Sarah's hand. "We need to leave now." But as we turned, another whisper curled around us, insidious and cold. "Stay," it beckoned, and I knew with chilling certainty that whatever was in the woods was no mere animal. "Run!" I shouted, and we all took off, sprinting into the night, the fire's warm glow quickly disappearing behind us. The chase had begun, and the woods were alive with something terrifying. As we plunged into the darkness, I felt something lurking in the shadows, waiting for us to falter, ready to claim its next victim. The forest felt different in the early morning light. The sun had barely risen, casting elongated shadows that flickered like specters against the trees. I could still hear the whispers of the night echoing in my ears, a remnant of the events that had transpired. The shrill cries of the forest animals had quieted, leaving an uncomfortable stillness in their wake. I had hoped that sleep would ease the mounting dread, but every rustle outside the tent had kept me on edge. I stepped out, the damp earth squishing beneath my boots. The air was thick and heavy, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I walked over to the campfire, which still glowed faintly with the remnants of last night's flames. The charred logs looked ominous, like warning signs of what lurked beyond the flickering light. The others were still asleep, thankfully. I didn't want to share last night's horrors just yet. Derek had gone quiet after we heard the screams. I could sense he was spiraling into his own fears, much like I was, and I didn't want to provoke another episode. Emma, on the other hand, had been uncharacteristically stoic, her face pale but determined. I admired her resolve, but deep down, I feared what might be festering within her. I began to prepare breakfast, my hands mechanically chopping the ingredients for a simple omelet. My mind drifted to the events of the previous night, the figure, the fear that gripped me when I saw that silhouette in the distance. It had been too tall, too wrong. I stole glances toward the tree line, wary of what might emerge from the shadows. The first one to wake was Emma. She shuffled over, her hair disheveled, eyes still carrying the remnants of sleep. "Morning," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Breakfast is almost ready." As I cracked the eggs into the pan, I couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was scanning the woods, her discomfort palpable. I wanted to ask her about last night's screams, the memory of those sounds sent chills down my spine, but I hesitated. It was better to keep things light. Derek woke a short while later, his face drawn and tired. He looked at us both, his gaze lingering on Emma. "What's for breakfast?" he asked, the usual enthusiasm drained from his voice. "Just some eggs and toast," I said, trying to infuse cheer into my tone. "It's all we have left." "Good," he murmured, though his eyes darted toward the woods, as if he could sense something lurking there. I decided it was best not to mention the figure I had seen, not yet. After we ate, I suggested we go for a short hike, to clear our heads and shake off the unease. "It'll be good for us," I insisted, hoping they would agree. They nodded reluctantly, clearly still reeling from our sleepless night. As we ventured deeper into the forest, I felt the atmosphere shift again. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the underbrush rustled unnaturally, as if something was moving just out of sight. I led the way, keeping my pace brisk, trying to ignore the creeping sensation of being watched. "Hey, did you hear that?" Emma suddenly whispered, her voice trembling as she stopped in her tracks. "Hear what?" I asked, my heart ticking up a notch. "Listen." She strained to catch a sound that escaped my ears. I paused, forcing myself to focus. In the distance, there was a low, keening wail, almost like the wind. My skin prickled at the thought that it might be a voice, human yet distorted. "Let's just keep moving," Derek said, his voice a forced calm. "We're in the middle of nowhere. It's probably just animals." "Or something else," I added, trying to sound brave. We trudged on, the oppressive silence settling around us like a fog. Each step we took seemed to amplify the sounds of our surroundings, the snap of twigs underfoot, the distant rustle of leaves, the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. After a while, we stumbled upon a clearing, a small meadow framed by towering trees. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting an ethereal glow on the wildflowers that dotted the ground. It was beautiful, almost surreal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had trespassed into a sanctuary we were never meant to enter. "Let's rest here," I suggested, sinking onto a patch of grass. Emma and Derek joined me, though the tension in the air felt thicker. We exchanged nervous glances, and in that moment, the unease bubbled to the surface. "Do you think it's safe?" Emma asked, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to see the tall figure lurking behind the trees. "What do you mean?" I shot back, though I couldn't help but feel a sinking sensation in my stomach. Last night, the screams. They felt so real. What if someone is out here with us? Her voice trembled, but the urgency in her tone made it impossible to ignore. Derek shook his head, trying to bolster his own confidence. We're fine. We just need to stick together. But even as he said it, the doubt seeped into his expression. In that moment, we were no longer just campers in a picturesque forest. We were prey, hunted by something unseen. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I could feel the shadows deepen around us, ready to swallow whatever was left of our fragile sanity. Story 3: Lost Souls Beneath the Crimson Waves. The sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck of the SS Mariner. It was my first cruise, meant to be a week of relaxation and indulgence, but as I stood leaning against the railing, a gnawing sense of dread wrapped around my gut like a snake. I dismissed it as nerves. After all, I was far from home, surrounded by strangers. The salt of the ocean air was supposed to be liberating, but the vastness of the water felt like an expanse of unknown terror. I had arrived with a group of friends, but they had since dispersed to partake in the ship's myriad of entertainment options. I, on the other hand, found solace in solitude, enjoying the quiet moments that came with being alone. The boat rocked gently beneath my feet, a rhythm that should have lulled me into comfort, yet I felt more alert than ever. The lights aboard gleamed like stars against the encroaching darkness. Laughter echoed from the bar, muffled by the wind, but it was the distant sound of something else that caught my attention. It was an odd, hollow thump, as if something heavy had struck the hull. I turned to look toward the source, but the only thing I saw was the endless stretch of water, a dark, undulating mass that swallowed all light. Shaking my head, I blamed the sound on my imagination. After all, cruise ships made noises, creaks and groans that were simply the boat adjusting to the waves. I glanced at my watch, noting that it was nearly time for dinner. I decided to head inside, hoping the warmth of the dining room would chase away the unease that clung to me. Inside, the atmosphere was vibrant, filled with the chatter of fellow passengers and the clinking of silverware. I sat with my friends at a table far too large for our group of 4, all of us animatedly discussing our plans for the next day. The elaborate decor, with its gold accents and sea-themed murals, did little to lift the weight brewing in my chest. I forced myself to smile, to engage in the conversation, all while a small voice whispered that something was amiss. As the night wore on, the ship continued to sway with the waves, but the hollow sound I had heard earlier lingered in my thoughts. I excused myself, claiming I needed some fresh air, though part of me simply wanted to escape the noise for a while. As I stepped back onto the deck, the wind caught my hair, and I shivered despite the mild temperature. The stars twinkled above, but their beauty was lost on me. I leaned against the railing again, staring into the inky abyss below. It was just the ocean, I told myself, just an endless stretch of water that held no secrets. Yet, a chill ran down my spine with the thought that there was a world beneath the waves, a vast expanse uncharted and unknown. My thoughts spiraled as I recalled a documentary about the shipwrecks scattered across the ocean floor. What if, I wondered, what if something had gone wrong? The rational part of my mind quickly dismissed the thoughts, reminding me that the SS Mariner was a modern marvel, built to withstand storms and the forces of nature. But the feeling of dread had returned, stronger now, as if something unseen was lurking just out of sight. It was then that I noticed a figure across the deck, standing too still against the backdrop of the night. They were clad in dark clothing, their face obscured by a white-brimmed hat, casting shadows over their features. I could not see them clearly, but an instinctual chill coursed through me. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure, sensing my gaze, turned abruptly. An emotion flickered across their face, fear or anger, I couldn't tell. Before I could react, they moved with a sudden swiftness, disappearing into the shadows cast by the ship's lifeboats. My heart raced. I should have called out, but something held me back, a primal urge telling me to retreat. The laughter from inside faded, replaced by the quiet lapping of waves against the hull. I felt completely alone, ensnared in a web of uncertainty. The sight of that stranger unsettled me deeply, and I made my way back to the dining room, hoping to shake off the creeping paranoia. As I approached the entrance, a shiver coursed through me. The dining area was unnaturally silent, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. I stepped inside, scanning the tables for my friends. They were gone, replaced by empty chairs and half-eaten plates. Panic rose in my throat. Where had everyone gone? The waitstaff moved about with distant looks on their faces, seemingly unaware of my growing anxiety. I rushed toward the bar, my heart pounding as I searched for any familiar faces. Each passing moment amplified my fear, a sense of isolation creeping in. I approached the bartender, a middle-aged man with a flat demeanor. "Excuse me, where did everyone go?" "My friends were just here." He looked at me with a blank stare before shaking his head slowly. "I haven't seen anyone like that tonight." I could feel my skin prickle with unease. I glanced around again, hoping to find anyone who might be able to help. Instead, I found only emptiness. The laughter I had heard earlier was replaced by an eerie quiet, as if the ship itself had swallowed the joviality of the evening. "Your friends are probably just enjoying the entertainment," the bartender finally offered, but his tone lacked conviction. I nodded, forcing a smile, but doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Stumbling back out onto the deck, I battled the urge to scream. The vastness of the ocean mocked me, an impenetrable darkness that felt alive. I peered into the shadows, hoping to catch a glimpse of my friends, but found nothing. The figure I had seen earlier flashed in my mind, and I wondered if they had something to do with the sudden disappearance of my group. The wind howled, and I realized that I was utterly alone in the belly of this floating beast. The thump I had heard earlier echoed in my mind, a reminder that deep within the bowels of this ship, something was lurking. I pulled my coat tighter around me, feeling the chill seep into my bones, and steeled myself against the rising tide of fear. Whatever was waiting in the shadows, I was determined to uncover it. I woke the next morning to the rhythmic creaking of the ship. The sounds were unrelenting, like the groans of a beast in pain. I rubbed my eyes, attempting to shake off the remnants of a restless night. Just beyond my cabin door, the world was a chaotic swirl of bright colors and laughter, but I felt none of it. A deep sense of dread clung to me, an unsettling weight that refused to lift. After a quick shower, I stepped outside, drawn to the promise of sun and sea. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes your clothes feel damp. I wandered toward the deck, where the sun beat down relentlessly. The ship seemed alive, buzzing with the energy of passengers who gathered in clusters, sipping cocktails. Laughter floated through the air, a stark contrast to the unease that churned in my stomach. I settled into a lounge chair, determined to shake off my mood. The vast expanse of ocean stretched out before me, the waves lazily lapping against the ship's hull, whispering secrets that only they understood. I closed my eyes, trying to drown out the noise around me, but it was then that I heard a faint echo, almost like a call. It was a haunting sound that twisted through the air, barely audible over the ship's engine. I opened my eyes, scanning the deck. People were still laughing, carefree. I thought perhaps I had imagined it, a product of my anxiety. The deep blue of the ocean and the clear sky had a way of making everything feel surreal. I returned to my sunbathing, but the call lingered in the back of my mind, tugging at something primal. A sudden commotion erupted from a group gathered near the edge of the deck. I sat up, curiosity piqued. The passengers were pointing, gasping, their faces a mixture of shock and exhilaration. I rose, moving closer to the throng, my heart racing as I pushed through the crowd. What had they seen? A dolphin? A whale? But as I reached the front, my heart sank. There, in the water, was a body. The figure floated face down, still as a statue. Panic rippled through the crowd, soon transformed into a cacophony of screams and shouts. Someone had fallen overboard, I thought, but as the crew rushed to the scene, the whispers turned darker. "It's not just any body," I heard someone say, their voice trembling. "It looks like..." I stepped back, overwhelmed by the swelling chaos. The body appeared too still, too lifeless, a sickening contrast against the vibrant blue of the sea. The crew worked swiftly, throwing a rescue ring, but it was clear they were not prepared for this. I edged away from the growing crowd, desperate to escape the rising tide of fear that seeped into my bones. I returned to my cabin, locking the door behind me. My mind raced with questions. Who was it? How had they ended up in the water? I tried to drown out the noise of the ship, the laughter that felt so foreign now. I wished I could find a way to escape the suffocating atmosphere. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I reached for my phone to call my sister. We had planned this vacation together, and I needed to hear her voice. The screen lit up, and I scrolled through my contacts, but my thumb hesitated. A wave of disbelief washed over me. The call would seem trivial against the dark reality unfolding around me. Instead, I leaned back, letting my mind wander. The memory of the body haunted me, images flickering like a broken film reel. I tried to convince myself it wasn't as grim as it seemed. Perhaps the person had simply slipped and drowned. But the skepticism nagged at me, worming its way into my thoughts. An abrupt knock rattled my door, jolting me from my reverie. I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding. "Who is it?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's the captain. We need to talk." The urgency in his voice pulled me from my stupor. I opened the door slowly, revealing a stern-looking man with dark circles under his eyes. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping into my cabin as if he belonged there. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" he asked, his tone clipped. I could feel the tension radiating off him, his body taut like a bowstring. "No, I haven't," I replied, confusion clouding my mind. "Why? What's going on?" The captain glanced at the door, ensuring we were alone before speaking again. "A passenger is missing. We believe they may have been pushed." A chill coursed through me, a cold realization settling in my bones. "You think someone did this on purpose?" "I don't know," he admitted, gaze hardening. "But we have to consider all possibilities. I need everyone to stay in their cabins until further notice. There may be a threat on board." His words spun around my mind like a storm. I could still hear the distant laughter from the deck, the sun-soaked revelry that felt so far removed from the dark reality enveloping me. The captain turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait. What if something happens to me? What if..." He cut me off, his voice low and urgent. "Just stay safe. And keep your door locked." I watched him leave, a gaping void where reassurance should have been. Alone again, I leaned against the door, sensing the ship's creaks now more than ever. They weren't merely sounds, they were warnings, cries from the ship as if she knew something we did not. The ocean outside roared, waves crashing against the hull, echoing the chaos brewing within me. I felt the oppressive weight of the unknown, the dread that something sinister lurked just beyond my door. The days blurred together on the sapphire dawn, a floating city of luxury drifting over the indifferent waves of the ocean. After the party had ended, I was alone in my cabin, the silence pressing down on me like a heavy weight. I had been avoiding the upper decks since the incident with the woman in the red dress. My heart still raced at the thought of her. The image of her pale face, twisted in a silent scream, haunted me even in the depths of night, when the soft lull of the ocean normally soothed me into sleep. I stared out of the small porthole, the vastness of the sea stretching endlessly, a beautiful but deceptive mirror. My reflection stared back, weary and unsettled. I should have felt grateful. I had come aboard for a much-needed vacation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible lurked beneath the surface, something that extended far beyond the ship's polished decks and extravagant meals. Each day, whispers circulated among the passengers like dark clouds gathering before a storm. An air of tension hung over us, thick enough to smother any remaining joy. I decided to venture up to the main deck, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. As I ascended the staircase, I passed a group of passengers huddled together, their faces drawn and pale. I caught snippets of their conversation, words like missing and search party floating through the air. They turned to me as I approached, their eyes wide, as though I might deliver some revelation. I offered a weak smile and pressed on, their gaze lingering on me like an unwanted shroud. The night was unusually warm, the stars obscured by a blanket of clouds. I leaned against the railing, the salty breeze tangling my hair. Below me, the sea churned ominously, dark and restless. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the doubts that plagued me. Then, a sound broke through the murmurs of the ocean, a faint cry, sharp and desperate. I snapped my eyes open, scanning the water. Had I imagined it? I shook my head, casting the thought aside. After all, the ship was filled with people. Someone must have simply lost their way in a game of late-night revelry. The cry pierced through the air again, this time unmistakable. My heart raced, and I leaned farther over the railing, peering into the abyss below. The ocean roared back, indifferent and dark. I felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to find the source, but reason held me back. I turned away from the railing, retreating into the belly of the ship, where I hoped to find comfort among the other passengers. The corridors were eerily quiet, the soft hum of the ship's engines my only companion. I passed the common areas, but the lounges felt empty, the lights dimmed as if the ship itself was dimming under the weight of something unseen. I made my way to my cabin, but before I could reach for the door, I heard the sound again, a soft, almost inaudible cry coming from the room next door. I hesitated, my hand hovering mid-air. Curiosity battled with fear, and I chose to knock softly, a hesitant tap against the polished wood. The cry stopped abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence. I knocked again, this time louder, and the door creaked open to reveal a young woman, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "What's wrong?" I asked, concern cutting through my hesitation. The woman, perhaps in her late 20s, glanced over her shoulder as if afraid of an unseen threat. "It's my friend. She's missing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She was here earlier, and now, she's gone." A chill crept over me, and dread clawed at the edges of my mind. "Have you checked the other decks?" "Everywhere. The staff isn't taking it seriously. They think she's just drunk or wandering around." I stepped inside, the air heavy with anxiety. "What's her name?" "Clara," she replied, trembling. She was wearing a white sundress and, oh God, she looked so happy before. "I don't understand. She wouldn't just leave." The irrational part of my mind screamed at me to flee. Maybe she's just hiding. "Have you checked the bars or the dance floor?" "I just came from there." The woman's voice cracked. "I didn't find her. It feels wrong. Something isn't right on this ship." I could sense the shift in reality, as if the sapphire dawn had transformed from a luxurious cruise into a dark labyrinth. I took a deep breath, forcing calmness into my voice. "Let's look together. She might be in trouble." We stepped back into the corridor, and I felt the weight of darkness pressing in from all angles. The ship was too quiet now, the usual sounds of laughter and music stifled. We moved carefully, aware of every footstep echoing against the polished floors. As we searched, the feeling of being watched gnawed at my back. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching and contorting in the dim light. Finally, we reached the main deck, where the party had been just hours before. The lights dimmed, the dance floor empty, and still, there was no sign of Clara. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upper deck, breaking the tension and drawing our attention. The young woman and I exchanged a glance, and without words, we rushed toward the sound. As we climbed the last set of stairs, the air grew colder. The upper deck was eerily still, but the source of the noise was evident: an overturned table, chairs scattered like discarded toys. I looked around, anxiety prickling at my skin. "Clara!" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the darkness. What was happening? The sound of waves below filled my ears, but I felt as if the ocean itself was listening, waiting. I stepped cautiously toward the edge of the deck, peering into the void. The ocean surged below, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of something beneath the surface, a flash of white, like a dress. The young woman gasped beside me. "No, it can't be." My heart raced as I leaned over the railing, despair and terror coiling in my chest. There was no turning back now, and the secrets of the sapphire dawn were beginning to unfurl, threatening to drag us all into the depths. The last sliver of sunlight dipped beneath the horizon, leaving the ocean cloaked in shadows. Waves crashed against the hull of the ship, a haunting rhythm that echoed in the back of my mind. I had tried to tell myself that it was just another night aboard the Aurora, another evening spent with strangers who drifted through life like the vessel itself. But an unsettling feeling gnawed at me, deeper than the chill creeping into the air. After the incident with Anna, I felt the weight of her absence like a physical presence. I had searched the ship for her, trudging through the elaborate corridors that twisted like a labyrinth, my heart pounding with each door I tried. I had asked the crew, my voice strained with urgency, but they merely shrugged and offered vague reassurances. "She'll turn up," they said. "Just give her time." Time was now a luxury I could afford. Something sinister lurked beneath the surface. I decided to head to the deck, hoping the open air would clear my mind. As I stepped outside, the cold wind hit me like a slap. I wrapped my arms around myself, scanning the dimly lit expanse of the upper deck. A few passengers milled about, their laughter mingling with the sound of the sea. They were blissfully unaware of the whirlwind of dread that threatened to swallow me whole. I felt like a ghost among them, untouched and untouchable, the reality of my situation pressing down harder with each passing moment. A shrill cry pierced the air, startling me out of my reverie. It echoed down the corridor leading to the observation lounge. My heart raced. I knew I had to investigate. I followed the sound, the floor vibrating beneath my feet as I quickened my pace. I could hardly breathe, each footfall heavy with a sense of foreboding. As I entered the lounge, I saw a group huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide. They pointed toward the glass panels overlooking the dark water. I pushed through the crowd, longing to see whatever had sparked such terror. My breath hitched as I caught sight of a figure thrashing in the water, struggling against the waves. "Help!" a voice shouted, panic lacing every syllable. It was a man, flailing helplessly, a mere silhouette against the inky depths. "Someone, please!" Without thinking, I rushed to the door leading to the deck. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the lounge, but I couldn't abandon him. I burst out into the wind, the taste of salt and fear mingling in the air. The lifeboats hummed suspended above me, a glimmer of potential salvation against the backdrop of fear. "Throw me a line!" The man continued to shout, desperation etched into his features. I looked back toward the lounge, but the crowd was still frozen in disbelief, too paralyzed to act. I grabbed a nearby life preserver and shouted back to him. "Catch this!" I hurled the buoy towards him, my aim unsteady in the gusts of wind. He reached, fingers brushing against the edge but missing it entirely. Panic gripped me as the desperation in his eyes turned to resignation. "Please," he gasped, his voice wavering as the waves pulled him further away. "I can't swim." I cursed under my breath, my chest tightening with helplessness. I could see the dark water pulling him down, the moonlight barely illuminating the struggle. I turned towards the stairwell leading down to the lower deck, my mind racing with ideas. I needed something else, something that could reach him. I sprinted back inside, my pulse thunderous in my ears. The lounge was still crowded, but now whispers turned to murmurs of confusion. I approached the nearest crew member, a tall man with a stern expression. "There's a man in the water. We need to help him." He shot me a look that was half pity, half disbelief. "You can't just jump in there. We'll send a boat. Now!" I insisted, my voice breaking. "He's going to drown." He hesitated, and I could see the debate flickering in his eyes, but before he could speak, another crew member joined him, and they began to discuss the situation in hushed tones. Anger swelled within me, the urgency of the moment was slipping away as they weighed their options. I turned to look back toward the glass panels, my heart sinking as I saw the man disappear beneath the surface. Just like that, he was gone. I felt sick. Before any decision could be made, another shout erupted from the deck. "Look!" Someone pointed at the water, and I froze. The sea surged violently, as if disturbed by something deep beneath its surface. A chilling silence fell over us as we all turned to watch. Flashes of movement caught my eye, a dark shape twisting through the water. I squinted, my instinct screaming that there was something wrong, something unnatural about it. The figure of the man had vanished entirely, replaced by a murky mass that coiled and twisted in the depths. "What is that?" someone whispered, terror lacing their voice. A shadow flickered, darting below the surface, and I realized with mounting horror that it wasn't just the waves that held the man captive. The sea itself seemed to writhe, alive with a menace I couldn't comprehend. The crew finally sprang into action, rushing to the lifeboats and shouting orders, but it felt too late. I stumbled back, a scream stuck in my throat, the atmosphere thickening with dread. The waves churned violently, as if something were rising, and the air became charged with an unnameable fear. I was trapped in a nightmare, a passenger on a ship caught between the depths and the unknown, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had taken the man would not be satisfied until it claimed more. I turned away, heart racing, heading back toward the lounge where I hoped to find safety, but all I found was the chilling realization that we were no longer just drifting through the night. We had crossed into something far darker. The smell of salt water mixed with something metallic lingered in the air as I stepped into the cavernous dining hall that overlooked the ocean. Soft, muted lights hung low from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the elegant table settings. Earlier that day, I caught a glimpse of the sun setting, painting the horizon in hues of crimson and gold, but now, darkness had swallowed the sky. My stomach twisted as I considered the stories I had heard, the whispers among the guests about things that lurked beneath the waves, and the grim fate of the ship's last voyage. I moved cautiously through the dining hall, the heavy silence wrapping around me like a thick fog. The other guests, once boisterous and lively, had retreated to their corners, their faces pallid and drawn. A sense of unease settled over me like an unwelcome guest, hanging in the air and gnawing at my insides. I could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the ship, a staccato rhythm that harmonized with the roar of the ocean. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, aware of the horrors it harbored. My mind wandered back to the previous night, to the shadows that danced against my cabin walls, to the sound of splashing water that had awakened me from a restless sleep. I had convinced myself it was a dream until the morning when I discovered claw marks etched into the side of my cabin door, deep and frantic. I rubbed at the memory, willing the grotesque image away, but the sensation clung to me like a parasite. As I approached a table in the corner, I noticed a woman sitting alone, her food untouched. Her gaze was fixed on something beyond the window. I hesitated before approaching her, drawn in by the vacant look in her eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely breaking the oppressive atmosphere. She turned slowly, her expression shifting from vacant to startled, as if she had only just realized I was there. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It's not safe. They're watching." I glanced around, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. "Who?" "The shadows," she murmured, glancing toward the window as if expecting something to materialize from the depths of the ocean. "They come at night. They want—" Her sentence trailed off into silence, leaving a hollow dread in its wake. I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing. "What do they want?" "Your soul," she replied, her tone flat and devoid of emotion. "They'll take it, and you won't even know." I took a step back, my heart pounding. I wanted to dismiss her fears as the delusions of a troubled mind, but something in her gaze anchored me in place. I could sense the truth in her terror, and I felt the creeping tendrils of panic begin to wind around my chest. Before I could question her further, a sudden crash echoed from the kitchen. The sound shattered the stillness like glass, and I turned instinctively toward the source. The door swung open, and a man stumbled out, his shirt stained crimson. He froze for a moment, eyes wide as he scanned the room, and then he bolted toward the exit. The dining hall erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and scrambled for the door as panic surged through the crowd like a wave. I stood frozen, my mind racing. The woman had warned me. I had felt something lurking around the edges of my consciousness, but now it was undeniable. I pushed through the crowd, desperate to get outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the railings, the ocean splashing angrily against the ship's hull. Beneath the surface, I imagined dark shapes writhing, waiting, ever patient. Behind me, the chaos of the dining hall faded into the background, replaced by the rhythmic crashing of waves. As I leaned against the railing, I gasped for breath, my lungs burning. I looked down into the dark water. It churned, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, long and sinuous, gliding just out of sight. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, a scream lodged in my throat. A presence loomed behind me, cold and oppressive. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. The woman from the dining hall stood there, her eyes wide and wild. "They're coming," she warned, her voice trembling. "They can sense your fear." "Who?" I stammered, desperately searching for an explanation, some semblance of logic in the chaos. "What do they want with us?" "They want to feed," she whispered, her breath trembling in the night air. "And they'll take you if you're not careful." Before I could respond, the ship lurched violently. I stumbled, gripping the railing to steady myself. The ocean surged higher, and I heard a low growl echoing from the depths, a sound that sent chills crawling down my spine. Panic flooded back as I realized the night was far from over. I glanced back at the dining hall, illuminated by flickering lights. Shadows moved within, twisting and contorting as if alive. The atmosphere thickened, but I couldn't turn away. Something inside me compelled me to stay, to confront whatever nightmare awaited within those walls. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself against the rising tide of fear. I was not ready to surrender my life or my soul to whatever haunted this ship. I turned to the woman, ready to pull her with me, but she stood transfixed, eyes glazed over, as if the shadows had already claimed her. "No!" I cried, reaching for her, but it was too late. She seemed to dissolve into the darkness, lost to whatever malevolence was harboring within the ship. The ocean roared beneath me, and I knew I was about to face the unknown, the darkness that had been waiting for me since I stepped aboard. Story 4: Echoes of the Forsaken Cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine as I stepped out of the car, the engine's hum fading into the rustle of the trees. I had come here seeking solitude, a break from the chaos of city life, but the oppressive silence of the woods swallowed my intention whole. The cabin loomed ahead, half hidden among gnarled roots and overgrown shrubs, its dark wood walls battered by years of neglect. It had been my grandfather's once, a place where he had spent his summers, and to me, it was a relic of childhood, a sanctuary that had somehow turned sinister over the years. I unloaded my suitcase from the trunk, its weight a comforting reminder of normalcy amidst the eerie stillness. As I approached the entrance, I noticed the door sagging slightly on its hinges, as if it were unsure whether to welcome me or warn me away. I inhaled deeply, a mix of nostalgia and trepidation swirling within me, and pushed the door open. The smell of mildew struck me immediately, mingling with the faint aroma of pine and something I couldn't quite place, something old, decayed. The interior was dim, illuminated only by the slanted afternoon light filtering through the grimy windows. Dust motes danced in the beams, swirling like phantoms in the air. I stepped into what had once been a cozy living room, now a canvas of shadows and dust. The furniture was shrouded in white sheets, ghostly remnants of a life long abandoned. I pulled back the sheet covering the couch, revealing a faded floral pattern that once might have been vibrant. Despite its dilapidation, a sense of warmth washed over me. It was familiar, a reminder of summers spent in this very space, laughing and playing games with my cousins. But those memories felt tainted now, like the few household items scattered about that had begun to rot. As I moved through the cabin, the floorboards creaked under my weight. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the moment. I could not let the eerie atmosphere swallow me whole. I had come here to find peace. I hesitated in front of the fireplace, its ashes long cold, and I decided to explore the rest of the cabin before settling in. The kitchen was a desolate scene, with a rusted sink and a counter littered with old jars, some shattered, others still intact but filled with a dark, viscous liquid that sent a shiver down my spine. A cluster of insects scurried away as I stepped closer, their hurried movements a reminder that nature thrived even in decay. I turned away quickly, my stomach churning at the thought of what I might discover next. The second floor was more of the same, though the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing the bare wood beneath. I peered into the tiny bedrooms. Each contained a bed, a wardrobe, and an unsettling emptiness that echoed my own feelings of isolation. I was about to turn back when I noticed a door at the end of the hallway, one I didn't recall from my childhood. Curiosity piqued, I pushed it open. Inside lay a small room, unfurnished and bare except for a single window that looked out into the darkening woods. The glass was grimy, obscuring my view, but the air felt different here, heavier, charged. As I stood there, a chill crept up my spine, and I suddenly felt as though I were not alone. I brushed the feeling aside, attributing it to my imagination and the oppressive silence that settled like a shroud over the cabin. Night fell quickly, the sun dipping behind the trees and casting long shadows across the floor. I lit a few candles, their flickering flames providing the only light as I settled on the couch with a book, hoping to drown out the growing unease that clawed at my insides. But the words blurred together as every creak of the cabin sent my heart racing. The wind outside began to pick up, howling through the trees, and I could have sworn I heard whispers mingling with its gusts. My imagination was running wild. I tried to focus, but my thoughts drifted to the stories my grandfather had told me of things unseen lurking in the woods, of strange occurrences that could not be explained. I dismissed them, chalking them up to the wild tales of a man who had spent too much time alone in the wilderness. But as the night deepened, I could feel an intangible weight pressing down on me. I set the book aside and wandered back to the window, peering into the darkness. The silhouette of the trees danced ominously against the moonlight, and my heart raced as I thought I saw movement at the edge of the woods. I blinked, but nothing remained. Terror gripped me, and I backed away from the window, bumping against an end table with a crash. The noise echoed, shattering the stillness of the cabin, and I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. I listened intently, praying the sound would not draw whatever was out there closer. Then came the sound of faint scratching, like nails on wood, emanating from the back of the cabin. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and it sent ice coursing through my veins. I stood paralyzed, my mind racing through every rational explanation, but it was drowned out by the growing certainty that something was trying to get in. I took a step back, my heart pounding as the scratching persisted. I was no longer in control of my fear. It had turned into a living thing, wrapping around my throat and squeezing. I dashed for the door, praying my escape would not be cut off. Whatever waited in those shadows was not part of my childhood memories. It was something darker, something I had unknowingly awakened in the quiet of the woods. The morning after the storm felt surreal, as if the world had washed itself clean of the night's horrors. Sunlight poured into the cabin through the small, grimy windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. I sat at the rickety wooden table, a cup of instant coffee warming my hands, but the warmth did little to chase away the chill that wrapped itself around my spine. My mind replayed the events of the previous night, the howling wind, the way the trees had seemed to lean in closer, their branches clawing at the windows like desperate fingers. The shadows had shifted unnaturally, transforming the familiar into the grotesque. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of the feeble light. It was ridiculous, I told myself. The isolation had probably warped my perception. Or maybe it was the caffeine. I decided to explore the cabin a bit more thoroughly, seeking some semblance of normalcy amidst the remnants of fear. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet echoed in the stillness, amplifying my unease. I wandered into the small living room, which contained a faded sofa and a fireplace that bore the char marks of expired fires. The air smelled of damp wood and age, and I couldn't help but run my fingers over the peeling wallpaper, a floral pattern that had long lost its vibrancy. In the corner of the room stood a small bookshelf, its shelves sagging under the weight of dust-covered novels and a few musty cookbooks. I pulled one of the novels free, the title worn and faded, but it was the spine that caught my eye. It looked as though someone had pressed something between the pages. Curiosity piqued, I flipped to the middle and found a faded photograph, two women standing outside this very cabin, smiling against the backdrop of the forest. Their eyes seemed to glimmer with a secret I couldn't quite grasp. I tucked the photograph into my pocket, a part of me hoping it would offer a clue to the cabin's history. After a while, I ventured outside, determined to shake off the oppressive atmosphere that clung to the cabin. The storm had left behind a shimmering layer of dew on the grass, each droplet catching the sunlight like tiny jewels. The trees stood sentinel, their trunks dark and thick, branches swaying lightly in the breeze. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs, and tried to clear my head. I wandered along a narrow path that wound through the trees, the underbrush crunching beneath my feet. Nature was beautiful, but there was an underlying tension in the air, a stillness that felt pregnant with something unspoken. The woods closed around me, their silence an almost living thing, and I couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. I glanced over my shoulder occasionally, half expecting to see eyes peering from the shadows, but there was nothing, only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing, where the sun broke through the canopy and bathed the ground in warm light. In the center stood a decaying stump, its surface marred by deep grooves and the tracks of some long-gone creature. I knelt beside it, tracing the lines with my fingers, lost in thought when a sudden rustle from the bushes snatched my attention. My heart raced as I turned sharply, the sound reverberating in my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly as it echoed through the trees. No response came, just the wind sighing through the branches. I stood there, frozen, waiting for something, anything, but received only the eerie stillness of the woods in return. I knew I shouldn't linger. The woods were vast, and it was easy to lose your way. Reluctantly, I retraced my steps along the path back to the cabin, urgency pressing upon me. As I crossed the threshold, I felt an uncanny sensation wash over me, a shift in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The cabin felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it had absorbed every whispered secret of the woods. I made my way to the bedroom, which was sparsely furnished with a bed and a small dresser. The closet door hung ajar, and curiosity nudged me to investigate. I pulled it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and was met with the musty scent of neglected space. A wave of unease coursed through me as I pushed aside a few old blankets, revealing a small wooden box hidden in the corner. My heart raced as I knelt down, prying the lid open with trembling fingers. Inside lay a collection of trinkets, old coins, a tarnished locket, and a small, intricately carved figurine resembling a twisted tree. Each item felt heavy with history, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they had once belonged to someone who had experienced their own terror within these walls. Once more, I felt the weight of eyes upon me, but now they seemed to be inside my mind, whispering thoughts I didn't care to hear. Panic surged as I slammed the box shut, the reverberation echoing in the quiet room. I needed to escape the confines of this cabin, to breathe the open air away from its suffocating presence. As I stepped back into the living room, I caught a glimpse of movement outside, a shadow flitting between the trees, quick and deliberate. My heart raced, and I squinted, trying to discern what it was. But before I could make sense of it, the shadow vanished, leaving only the memory of its chilling presence. I was now alone here, and the thought made my stomach twist. I had come seeking solitude, but what I found was something else entirely. Fear crept up my spine like a spider's web, and I decided, then and there, that I would leave as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had to get out before whatever lingered in the depths of the woods found me. With a determined breath, I began to gather my things, but the feeling of dread remained, as heavy and suffocating as the night that had preceded this day. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow through the thin canopy of trees surrounding the cabin. I had hardly slept since that first night, my dreams plagued by whispers and shadows. The owl's hoots felt like a taunt, echoing through the stillness, reminding me of what I was trying to escape. Yet, the woods had a way of digging beneath your skin, bringing the unease to life with every rustle and creak. As dawn broke, shrouded in a cool mist that clung to the ground, I decided to venture outside. I needed to breathe, to shake off the suffocating feeling that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. My head throbbed with fatigue, but the thought of remaining inside the cabin felt unbearable. The walls seemed to close in on me, whispering secrets I was not meant to know. I stepped outside, the damp earth squelching beneath my boots. The air was crisp, the scent of pine mingling with the coolness of morning fog. I took a deep breath and headed toward the small creek that gurgled nearby, hoping the sound of running water would cleanse my mind of the nightmares that haunted me. As I approached the water, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, but as I turned my head, I saw it, a figure, partially obscured by the dense foliage. My heart raced. The figure was small, almost childlike, but it had an unsettling stillness about it that sent a chill down my spine. I squinted, unsure if I was seeing things, but the figure remained, watching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound steady. No answer came, only the rustle of leaves. I took a cautious step forward, but as I did, the figure slipped out of my view, disappearing into the thicket. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. I followed the direction I had seen the figure go, pushing through the underbrush. Branches snagged my clothes, but I pressed on, heart hammering in my chest. The feeling of being watched wrapped around me tighter with every step. The woods grew denser, The light filtering through the branches grew dimmer. I called out again, my voice echoing through the trees. "Is someone there?" Nothing but silence answered, a heavy, suffocating silence. I was alone. Or so I thought. Then, I heard it, a soft giggle, barely a whisper, but it felt alive, echoing in the air around me. Panic surged through my veins, and I turned to retreat, but the underbrush seemed to entangle my feet. I stumbled, twisting to free myself, when I heard the giggle again, closer this time. In a surge of adrenaline, I broke free and fled back toward the cabin, the laughter following me, a haunting melody that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The world blurred around me as I pushed through the trees, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door shut, breathing heavily. I locked the door and leaned against it, pressing my forehead against the cool wood. The giggling faded, but it left behind a lingering sense of dread, a reminder that I was not alone in these woods. Inside, the cabin felt suffocating again. I paced the small space, desperate for some rational explanation for what had just happened. A child? Out here, alone? My mind raced through possibilities, each more absurd than the last. Maybe it was just my imagination, a trick played by the isolation. I had been alone too long, my mind unhinging itself under the weight of the silence. I rummaged through the cabin for something, anything, to ground myself. I stumbled upon an old, dusty journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard. I brushed off the grime and opened it, hoping it contained some insight into the place I was stuck in. The pages were yellowed, filled with neat, cramped handwriting. The entries spoke of a family that had once lived in the cabin, things that seemed normal at first, tales of fishing trips, mishaps with firewood, and the joy of being in nature. But then it turned darker. The last entries grew frantic, the handwriting shaky. They spoke of strange noises, of shadows lurking in the corners of the woods, and of children lost, stolen, never seen again. My stomach turned as I read through the chilling recounts. Were the children real, or mere figments of a mind unraveling? As I flipped to the last page, a small sketch caught my eye. It depicted a child standing in the woods, but there was something wrong about it. The eyes were too large, too hollow. Beneath the drawing, a word was scrawled, barely legible: tread. A rustle outside sent me jumping. I slammed the journal shut and moved to the window, peering through the grime. The forest outside was quiet, but the feeling of unease was palpable. As I gazed out, I thought I saw a figure dart behind a tree, small and fast, like the one I had encountered earlier. I backed away from the window, fear rising in my throat. The woods were alive, breathing, existing in a way I couldn't understand. The journal whispered warnings, urging me to leave, but there was something I felt compelled to uncover. I was drawn in, tangled in a web of fate that seemed beyond my control. The giggle echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder that I was not just a visitor here. I was part of a story that was far from over. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, a heavy mist clinging to the trees like a shroud. I awoke to the echoes of last night's terror still looped in my mind, though the details remained frustratingly elusive. I sat up in bed, the chill seeping through the cabin walls biting at my skin. The flickering remnants of the fire from the previous night cast eerie shadows that danced across the dim interior. I could hardly believe I had chosen this place for our getaway. I made my way to the small kitchen area, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The coffee maker sputtered to life as I filled it with water, my hands trembling slightly. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled in my gut, but it clung persistently as if it had taken root. After a few cups of coffee, I felt marginally steadier. I forced myself into a normal routine, cleaning up dishes and planning a hike to explore the area. Maybe a distraction was what I needed. My phone, resting silently on the table, reminded me of the world I'd left behind, and I resisted the temptation to check for messages. Whatever awaited me back in the city felt trivial compared to the dread that loomed here. I donned my jacket and stepped outside. The mist shrouded the landscape, transforming the woods into a labyrinth of gray and muted greens. The towering pines stood tall like sentinels, their branches heavy with moisture. I could hear the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional call of birds, an unsettling contrast to the stillness that enveloped me. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the path grew less defined, overrun by roots and underbrush. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, making each breath a conscious effort. Shadows stretched and warped, the trees bending in unnatural ways under the weight of the fog. I pushed forward, hoping to find a clearing that would lift the weight from my chest. But the woods had other plans. I stumbled upon a small clearing, the ground littered with rotting leaves and fallen branches. At its center stood an old, weathered well, its stone walls crumbling and cracked. It looked as though it had been forgotten for decades, swallowed by the forest. I approached cautiously, peering into the dark void below. A chill coursed down my spine as I caught sight of something glinting in the depths. Reeling back, I shook my head as if to rid myself of the dark thoughts creeping into my mind. I had to keep moving. Yet I found myself glancing back at the well, the image of that glint haunting me. Was it just my imagination, or had I seen something there? I dismissed the thought and turned away, but the sense of being watched lingered in the air. Moments later, my instincts kicked in, and I felt the undeniable pressure of eyes upon me. I froze, scanning the tree line, every shadow twisting into a potential threat. My heart raced as I took slow, deliberate breaths. Perhaps it was just the forest playing tricks on my mind, but the sensation was too potent to ignore. I hurried away from the clearing, my pace quickening until I nearly broke into a run. The foliage rustled, branches snapping underfoot like brittle bones. I zigzagged through the trees, yearning for the comfort of the cabin, the walls that had felt so confining just yesterday. When I finally emerged from the trees, I was breathless, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the doorknob. I burst inside, slamming the door behind me. The cabin felt stiflingly small, the walls inching closer with every ragged breath I took. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes and willing the memories of the well and whatever lurked around it to fade away. Hours passed, the sunlight dwindling as clouds rolled in. Despite my efforts to focus on mundane tasks, washing dishes, organizing the meager supplies, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending dread. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting for something. As night fell, I lit the fireplace, the crackling flames offering little comfort. The shadows lengthened and stretched across the walls, the room narrowing. I settled into the worn chair, forcing myself to read a book I had brought, but the words blurred together as my thoughts drifted back to the well. Then, a knock echoed through the silence, sharp and jarring. I jumped, my heart racing as I glanced toward the door. The sound was definitive, a single, deliberate knock. I hesitated, the warmth of the fire almost mocking the chill that seeped into my bones. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer. Swallowing hard, I stood, every nerve in my body alert. I crept toward the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Who could be out there? I reached for the handle, fingers trembling, the wood splintering against my palm as I pulled it open. Nothing. An empty night sprawled before me, moonlight cutting through the thick fog like a knife. I peered into the darkness, dread coiling in my gut. I was about to close the door when a shiver ran down my spine, a sensation akin to icy fingers tracing my backbone. "Just the wind," I muttered to myself. But as I turned to retreat into the safety of the cabin, I caught a glimpse of a figure at the edge of the woods, a shadow among shadows, barely discernible against the trees. My breath hitched, and for a moment, the world stood still. I slammed the door shut and locked it, leaning against it as panic surged. The silence that followed was deafening, the unsettling feeling of being watched more potent than ever. I could feel them out there, lurking just beyond the threshold. Whatever had come for me in the woods had found me. I was not alone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind streaks of crimson that clung to the trees like warning signs. A chill seized the cabin, creeping through the cracks in the logs as if the very woods were exhaling frost-laden breaths. I sat by the dim light of the fireplace, the embers flickering like dying stars, their weak glow casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, I could hear the wind howling through the trees, a mournful sound that echoed deep within my chest, reminding me that I was utterly alone in this forsaken place. The events of the last few days weighed heavily on me. I thought about Lucas, his face twisted in terror as he stumbled back from the woods, his arm outstretched, pointing. He had seen something that night, something I had yet to comprehend. The frightened look in his eyes lingered in my mind, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the cabin's walls. The woods were no longer a refuge. They had become a prison, filled with secrets I dared not uncover. As I sat alone, the silence pressed down upon me like a thick velvet blanket, stifling and oppressive. The only sound was the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant rustle of leaves outside. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to banish the creeping anxiety that coiled around me. I had to make sense of it all. Had we simply imagined the strange occurrences? The whispers that seemed to drift on the wind? The shadows that flitted just beyond my vision? I glanced toward the door, its frame black against the dim light, and shivered. It felt wrong to be here, as if the very cabin absorbed the fear that nested within me. I had promised Lucas I would be brave, that we would face whatever haunted these woods together. But he had left, vanishing into the night after his frantic warning had driven him away. My thoughts spiraled back to that night, the one filled with terror and confusion. Lucas had bolted from the cabin as if something pursued him, his eyes wide and frantic. "It's not safe," he had shouted, his voice breaking with despair. I hadn't understood then, my mind clouded with disbelief, but now I felt it, the weight of something sinister lurking just beyond the light. The fire sputtered, and I reluctantly tossed another log onto the flames, watching as the flames surged momentarily, casting a brief reprieve of warmth. My heart raced as I shifted my gaze toward the window. The darkness had thickened outside, the trees standing like silent sentinels, watching, waiting. I stood and crept toward the window, drawn by a force I couldn't explain. Peering through the glass, I scanned the woods for any sign of movement. The branches swayed gently, creating a symphony of creaks and groans that seemed to echo my own unease. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something, a shadow, darted between the trees, too quick for me to discern. Panic clawed at my throat, and I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the wind picking up again, rustling through the leaves, almost as if it were whispering secrets to the night. My mind raced as I considered my options. Should I go looking for Lucas? What if he was still out there, lost and afraid? Or was it too late? What if there truly was something out there, something waiting? The cabin began to feel claustrophobic, the walls closing in on me. I needed to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of my confinement. I gathered my courage and stepped outside, the cold hitting me like a shock. The chill wrapped around me, an icy hand gripping my throat as I stood on the porch, staring into the engulfing darkness. The forest loomed, a wall of blackness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I took a step forward, the wooden planks creaking beneath my weight. "Lucas!" I called out, the sound swallowed by the wind. I felt foolish, but I had to try. The night was alive with the rustle of creatures stirring in the underbrush, adding to the eerie symphony that surrounded me. With each step I took, the feeling of being watched intensified. I felt eyes on me, hidden among the trees. I strained to listen, searching for any sign of my friend, but the only answer was the wind rustling through the branches. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the instinct to flee back inside. Then I saw a glimmer of light among the trees, flickering like a candle's flame. I felt an irrational pull toward it, an urgent need to discover what lay beyond the threshold of the familiar. My heart raced as I pushed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes as if trying to deter me. As I approached, the light grew steadier, illuminating a small clearing hidden deep within the woods. It was beautiful and strange, the kind of place that might have sparkled with magic in a different story. But the air was thick with foreboding, and the moment I stepped into the clearing, the breath caught in my throat. In the center stood a figure, cloaked in shadow, their face obscured. The light emanated from a lantern held loosely in their hand, casting an otherworldly glow that illuminated the surroundings. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to return to the safety of the cabin. But curiosity pushed me forward, an unanswered question that begged for resolution. "Lucas?" I ventured, my voice trembling. The figure remained still, the lantern swinging slightly as if stirred by an unseen wind. And then, with a voice that sliced through the silence, it spoke, the words a chilling echo of my fears. "You shouldn't have come here." The weight of dread settled over me like a shroud, and I felt, in that moment, that I had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Story 5, Flight 237, Descent into the Unknown. The dull roar of the engines was a constant reminder of my situation, vibrating through the cabin like a foreboding heartbeat. I had always felt anxiety at 30,000 feet, but this time, it gripped me with an almost tangible force. The plane, a hulking beast of metal and machinery, felt less like a vessel of travel and more like a tomb, suspended between the ground and the vast, indifferent sky. I glanced at the seat beside me, where Sarah usually sat. The warmth of her presence lingered like a shadow on the fabric, but she had excused herself to the restroom just before the plane took off. I could still picture the way her eyes sparkled with excitement, her curls bouncing as she laughed, oblivious to the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I had promised her this trip would be unforgettable, yet my mind spiraled toward the unknown. It was an ordinary flight, an hour and a half from Denver to Seattle, until it wasn't. The plane shuddered midair, and a weight settled in my chest as the cabin echoed with muffled gasps and murmurs. I gripped the armrests, feeling their cold plastic against my palms. People looked at one another, eyes wide, searching for reassurance. I tried to offer a comforting smile, but it faltered under the weight of my own fear. Minutes passed. The shuddering continued, interspersed with the unsettling creaks of the aircraft. I wondered where Sarah was. She had taken longer than usual. A flight attendant stepped down the aisle with a clipboard, but her smile was strained, her eyes darting nervously. I caught her gaze, and she turned away quickly, as if my fear was contagious. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers, haltingly announcing a minor turbulence issue. A few passengers chuckled nervously, but the laughter felt hollow. I forced myself to breathe, focusing on the rhythmic thrum of the engines, but it did little to quell the rising panic. I turned back to the aisle and searched for Sarah's familiar figure, my heart pounding as I realized she hadn't returned. I waited a few minutes more, tapping my foot anxiously, before I decided I had to check on her. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, feeling the plane sway slightly beneath my feet. As I made my way toward the restroom, I could sense the growing tension in the cabin. Faces that had once been animated were now drawn tight with worry. An elderly man clutched his armrest, whispering prayers under his breath. When I reached the restroom door, I knocked. "Sarah? You okay in there?" No response. I knocked again, harder this time, my heart racing as a sense of urgency shot through me. Still nothing. I pushed the door open slightly, but it was locked. A chill crept up my spine, and I turned back to the cabin, scanning each row for her. I returned to my seat, my stomach churning. The pilot's voice came through again, this time more urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm. We will keep you updated." The words hung heavily in the air, and I could feel the tension crackling among the passengers like static electricity. My gaze dropped to the seat beside me once more, betraying my anxiety. I reached for my phone, half expecting to find it had no service in the clouds. Still, I fumbled with it, tapping frantically. No signal. My palms went clammy as I looked toward the front of the cabin. The flight attendants had gathered in a huddle, whispering urgently, their faces pale. I bit my lip and felt the urge to bolt to the front, to demand answers, but a strange fear rooted me to the ground. I caught the eye of a young woman 2 rows ahead. Her expression mirrored mine, confusion mingled with panic. She seemed to sense my gaze and offered a shaky smile, but it quickly faded as the overhead lights flickered, plunging us into shadows before returning to their sterile glow. A collective intake of breath reverberated through the cabin. "Attention, everyone," the pilot's voice broke through the tension yet again, but this time it sounded strained. "We will be descending shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts. I repeat, we will be descending." My heart raced as I processed his words. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. I sank back into my seat, gripping the belt tightly as the plane began to tilt. The horizon tilted through the window, the ground looming ever closer. The dread that had settled in my gut transformed into a cold knot of fear. I mentally counted the seconds. A desperate part of me wished I could fly through time and find Sarah. The descent was rough, the plane lurching as if it were a living creature being dragged from the sky. I shut my eyes tightly, willing it all to be a nightmare. But as the cabin filled with murmurs of fear and disbelief, it became starkly clear this was reality. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but the air felt thick and stifled. Suddenly, the engines roared, and the descent intensified. The cabin filled with the sound of frantic voices, cries of distress. I opened my eyes and saw the expressions of sheer terror mirrored around me, a tapestry of fear woven among strangers. I turned back, desperate for anything familiar, my breath catching in my throat as I realized Sarah was still missing. As the plane careened toward the ground, I had a sinking feeling that whatever lay ahead would be far worse than the fear of the height itself. The haunting thought echoed in my mind, perhaps we weren't simply in descent, we were plummeting towards something far more sinister. I woke up drenched in a cold sweat, the smell of stale air lingering in my nostrils. The plane had descended into an unsettling stillness, pierced only by the soft hum of the engines. I blinked against the dim light filtering through the window, feeling the pressure in my chest. It wasn't just the altitude, my heart raced as I recalled the haunting dreams that had plagued me since I boarded. Each night had blended into the next, dreams of plummeting through a void, the screams of fellow passengers echoing in my ears, and a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind, too dark to fully grasp. As I sat up, my hands trembled against the armrest, fingers clutching the leather as if it were a lifeline. I glanced around the cabin, nothing appeared amiss. The other passengers were seated, some with their eyes closed, while others stared blankly ahead, lost in their thoughts. I tried to convince myself it was just the after effects of a restless night, but a nagging unease gnawed at my core. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus on the mundane, Afraid magazine tucked into the pocket of the seat in front of me. I picked it up, flipping through the pages, but the words swam before my eyes, blurring together as panic began to stir. The distant rumble of the engines felt ominous, an undercurrent of dread in the otherwise ordinary flight. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a flight attendant standing beside me, her face carefully composed, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. "Can I get you something to drink?" "No, thank you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I could sense that her smile was forced, a mask over an unease I couldn't quite place. She moved on, glancing back over her shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows of the cabin. The minutes stretched on, feeling like hours. I shifted in my seat, hoping to ease the tightness in my chest, but my gaze was drawn again to the window. Outside, I saw nothing but a sea of clouds. The white billows swirled in a chaotic dance, occasionally giving way to the deep blue sky that felt deceptively peaceful. Then, I spotted something, a flicker of movement against the clouds. My heart thudded as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was fleeting, just a blur, but it sent shivers racing down my spine. I shook my head, chastising myself for letting my imagination run wild. Perhaps the altitude played tricks on my mind. A loud thud jolted me from my reverie. My heart raced as I turned to see a man seated a few rows back. He had abruptly stood up, his face pale and his body tense. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, panic lacing his tone. His eyes darted around, searching for an explanation. The cabin erupted in murmurs, confusion spreading like wildfire. I glanced at the flight attendants, who hurried down the aisle to calm the rising turmoil. I could see the unease etched on their faces, mirroring my own. Something was wrong, something that went beyond the typical turbulence of air travel. Then the lights flickered. For an instant, I felt the world tilt, a brief sensation of weightlessness that left my stomach churning. Gasps filled the cabin as the overhead lights dimmed, plunging us into semi-darkness. The engines roared in protest, a dissonance that echoed the growing fear among us. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, shaky yet authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain calm while we assess the situation." There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. "We'll keep you updated." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The flight attendants continued to move through the aisles, but they were no longer offering drinks or snacks. They were checking seatbelts and imploring us to stay seated, their smiles gone, replaced by expressions of focused urgency. I tightened my grip on the armrest, fingernails digging into the leather as the plane lurched. My mind raced with possibilities. What could be happening? A storm? A mechanical failure? Or something more sinister? A sudden scream shattered the tense silence. It came from the back of the plane, high-pitched and filled with terror. My heart lurched as I turned to look, but all I saw was the chaotic movement of bodies, passengers standing up now, craning their necks to see what was happening. I felt the weight of fear settle heavily in my chest. "Stay in your seats," a flight attendant shouted, her voice cracking. "Please." But the panic swept through the cabin like wildfire, and suddenly everyone was on their feet, shouting, the atmosphere thick with dread. I had to get out, had to escape, my mind screamed. The exit was so close, yet it felt like a chasm separated us. I glanced back towards the source of the scream, my pulse pounding in my ears. An older woman stood frozen, staring wide-eyed at something or someone. I followed her gaze, my breath hitching as I caught sight of a dark figure in the rear of the plane. It stood just beyond the reach of the dim cabin lights, a silhouette with contours that felt impossibly wrong. Then it moved. With a jolt of instinctive fear, I jumped up, adrenaline coursing through me. The plane continued to shake, and I stumbled, bracing myself against the seat. The figure's movement was fluid, almost ethereal, gliding through the frightened crowd, and I felt the urge to flee, to escape whatever horror lurked behind it. But there was nowhere to go. And that was when I realized I was trapped. The sun hung low in the sky as we landed at the deserted airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The plane rattled to a stop, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My heart raced as the flight attendants announced our arrival and beckoned us to disembark. I had always thought that once the plane touched down, the worst was behind me. Yet, as I stepped onto the cold pavement, a chill slithered down my spine. The airport was eerily quiet. I glanced around, taking in the cracked cement walls and the flickering fluorescent lights that barely illuminated the arrival area. There were no welcoming voices, no bustling travelers, just a profound silence that draped over us like a thick fog. My fellow passengers looked just as bewildered, exchanging uncertain glances that mirrored my own anxiety. As we moved toward the baggage claim, a sense of foreboding crept over me. The air felt heavy, thick with an unspoken tension that made it difficult to breathe. I caught sight of a janitor, hunched over his cart, methodically cleaning the floor. His movements were slow, almost robotic. He glanced up briefly, his eyes hollow and sunken, before focusing back on his task. I shivered as his gaze lingered on me for a beat longer than necessary. One by one, pieces of luggage began to appear on the carousel. I stood there, my stomach twisting nervously as I waited for my bag to emerge. Other passengers hastily grabbed their belongings, some casting furtive looks over their shoulders, as if they sensed something was amiss. I felt their unease seep into my bones. Finally, my suitcase rolled into view, its bright red color standing out against the drab surroundings. I grabbed it quickly, relieved to have one familiar object in this strange place. The moment I turned to leave the baggage claim, however, I noticed the Eerie janitor again. He had stopped cleaning and was watching me closely, a strange smile creeping across his face. I hurried past him, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the once bright day was swallowed by an ominous gray. I stepped out of the airport's main entrance, greeted by an empty parking lot. My pulse quickened as I scanned the area, searching for some sign of life, someone to guide me. But there was only silence, broken by the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. I pulled out my phone, but as I swiped the screen, I noticed the signal bars flickering between no service and a single bar that barely held. Frustrated, I gripped my bag tighter, feeling more isolated by the moment. I made my way toward the exit, hoping to find a taxi or a bus, anything that could take me away from this nightmare. As I walked, I peered into the overgrown bushes lining the parking lot. Abandoned cars lay scattered, their windows shattered and bodies rusting away. It was as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it to decay in solitude. I could almost hear the whispers of the past, warnings hidden in the decay, but I shook my head, dismissing the feeling as paranoia. Then, I spotted it. A flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye drew me toward the far end of the parking lot. My heartbeat quickened again as a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby terminal. It was a woman, her face partially obscured by a hood. She stood there, watching me intently, yet making no move to approach. The darkness around her seemed to deepen, as if the shadows were clinging to her. "Excuse me," I called, my voice echoing in the emptiness. She didn't respond, her eyes piercing through the dim light. Something about her felt wrong, like a warning sign I couldn't quite comprehend. I hesitated, my instincts flaring. I should have turned back, but curiosity compelled me to take a step closer. The moment I did, she vanished into the shadows, leaving nothing but the lingering chill in the air. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, half expecting to find her lurking behind me. The parking lot now felt like a trap, an endless expanse of emptiness, and I was the prey. I sprinted toward the exit, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. My mind raced with thoughts of trying to reach someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. I raised my phone again, but the screen flashed no service for what felt like an eternity. I slammed it against my thigh in frustration. Suddenly, I heard a low rumble that resonated through the ground. I froze, staring back at the tarmac where the plane had landed just moments ago. The sound grew louder, a mechanical whirring mixed with an unsettling creak. My blood ran cold as I understood. It was coming from the plane. Against my better judgment, I turned and walked back toward the fuselage, each step feeling heavier than the last. The plane stood alone, a looming titan in the fading light, and I could see the cargo doors slowly swinging open. It was the source of the noise, like some great beast awakening from a long slumber. I glanced around, half expecting someone to join me, but the lot remained abandoned. With a shaky breath, I approached the plane's side. The cargo door creaked wider, revealing a darkened interior that seemed to beckon me closer. A rush of adrenaline surged through my veins, pulling me forward, but I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to run away. But then, I remembered the woman's eyes, the warning that never came. I took a step back, ready to flee, when a sound echoed through the stillness, an unmistakable voice drifting from the bowels of the aircraft, calling my name in a whisper that slithered through the air and wrapped around my mind. I turned to run, but it was too late. The darkness in the doorway beckoned, and I was drawn in, as if the very plane had come alive, hungry for the life it had lost. I thought I had prepared myself for the flight. I had heard the whispers of fear echoing in the dimly lit terminal, the subtle tremors of anxiety that rippled through the other passengers. As I boarded the plane, I caught sight of a child clutching a stuffed bear, her wide eyes darting around, searching for reassurance. I knew I should have felt comforted by the presence of other people, yet my heart hammered against my ribs like a desperate prisoner. The cabin was a cacophony of muffled conversations, the clang of luggage compartments being slammed shut, and the scent of artificial vanilla wafting from the air fresheners. I couldn't help but scan the faces around me for signs of distress, but they wore calm masks, as if rehearsed for this performance of normalcy. I tried to convince myself that flying was just a method of transportation, but deep down, I was aware that my insides twisted into knots every time the announcement of takeoff approached. Once settled into my window seat, I looked out at the tarmac, watching the hurrying figures of ground crew and the enormous machines that seemed to breathe life into the metal bird I was about to entrust my safety to. I focused on the woman seated next to me, who busied herself with her phone, tapping away indifferently. Her disengagement seemed to be the antidote to my rising panic, but it did little to quell the unease creeping into my bones. As the plane taxied, I caught glimpses of distant clouds gathering ominously. The cabin lights pulsated, casting elongated shadows that danced along the aisle. It felt as if the aircraft itself was alive, shuddering with anticipation. My fingernails dug into the armrests, and I forced my eyes shut, willing the dread to subside. But every rumble of the engines sent jolts through me, as though the plane had decided to unveil its true nature. The takeoff was surprisingly smooth, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being enclosed in a metallic coffin soaring through the skies. I lost myself in the white noise of engines and muffled conversations, focusing on the rhythmic rise and fall of the aircraft rather than the knot tightening in my stomach. As we ascended, the world below shrank into a patchwork of diminishing colors. The last traces of land slipped away, replaced by an endless blue. I turned to the woman beside me, desperate to find a shared comfort, but she had drifted into her world, oblivious to everything outside her phone screen. I felt the isolation seep in, an ever-encroaching fog that filled the cabin with a sense of foreboding. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently. A collective gasp escaped the passengers, a sound that felt like a tremor through the flesh of the aircraft. I gripped the armrest so hard I thought I might snap it off. The flight attendants exchanged hurried glances, their forced smiles fading. The overhead lights flickered, plunging the cabin into a stuttering darkness. Then came the announcement, a voice laced with an edge of urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The words dripped with an uneasy calm, but it did nothing to ease the mounting dread cascading through me like a wave. The turbulence intensified, and I felt the plane dip unnaturally. My heart raced as I glanced around. Panic had erupted among the passengers. A man shouted something unintelligible, while the child with the stuffed bear began to wail. I turned, desperate to find some semblance of reassurance, but the woman beside me was staring at the exit sign as if willing it to open. Suddenly, a harsh metallic screech pierced the air, followed by a violent shudder that rattled the windows. I felt a cold sweat beat at my temples, an icy finger tracing down my spine. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, everything held its breath. Then, one by one, the individual lights blinked out, leaving us cloaked in dark uncertainty. In that moment, the reality of our situation crashed down like the weight of the world. We were suspended in the sky, held by a fragile thread. I could hear my own breath, quick and shallow, almost drowning out the frantic prayers swirling around the cabin. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown to what? I wasn't sure. Stay calm, I told myself, but my voice was drowned out by the roaring engines and the sobs enveloping me. The sound of metal tearing against metal echoed, and the plane tilted sharply. I could see the panic-stricken faces around me, reflected in the dim light that flickered one last time before plunging us into an abyss. Terror gripped me as I cast a glance towards the emergency exits, each one seeming to shimmer in the darkness, taunting me with the promise of escape. But our fate was sealed in that fragile cocoon, and the air grew thick with an unspeakable dread. The turbulence intensified, as if the plane was being tossed by unseen hands, and I could do nothing but hold on and wait for the storm to either pass or consume us whole. Then the plane leveled out, the violent shudders gave way to a disquieting calm, and the lights flickered back on, revealing faces frozen in horror. I blinked against the artificial brightness, trying to steady my thoughts, but the heaviness in my chest remained. A voice crackled over the intercom, shaky but resolute. "We are currently assessing the situation. Please remain seated." The words barely registered, drowned by the sound of my racing heart. All around me, the passengers seemed to share a collective understanding. We were no longer just travelers on a plane. We were desperate souls trapped in a nightmare. And as I stared into the abyss, I understood that the real terror was not in the turbulence but in the silence that followed. There was something lurking in the shadows of that aircraft, and I could almost feel its gaze upon us. The cabin lights flickered, casting a harsh glow across the faces of the passengers. My heart raced as I gripped the armrests, staring out the tiny, scratched window. The darkness outside was impenetrable, a deep void where the only sign of life was the occasional flash of distant lightning. It had been hours since the plane left the ground, but it felt like we had flown into the belly of a storm. The turbulence had started as mild bumps, but it escalated quickly into violent shakes that rattled our bones. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm yet strained. He assured us that we would soon be out of the turbulence, but the way his voice wavered sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at my seatmate, a middle-aged man with eyes that mirrored my anxiety. His hands trembled as he clutched his briefcase, and I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was. We were in trouble. As the turbulence continued, the overhead bins rattled ominously, and I held my breath each time a loud thud echoed through the cabin. My mind replayed the news stories I had read, stories of planes swallowed by storms, of passengers lost to the winds of nature. I shut my eyes tightly, wishing the pressurized cabin would turn back into a homey passenger train, but the metal shell around us was too heavy, too real. A sudden jolt threw my body against the seatbelt. Gasps filled the air, the collective fear palpable. I opened my eyes, my heart racing faster than the plane itself. A woman a few rows ahead turned to look back at me, her face drained of color. She mouthed something, perhaps a prayer, but the words were lost in the chaos. The turbulence intensified, the plane bucking and swaying as if it were a living beast trying to break free from the storm's grip. The lights flickered again, plunging us into near darkness for a heartbeat before returning. That's when I noticed it, an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite place. A low, rumbling growl resonated through the cabin, vibrating against my bones. I shot a glance at the flight attendants, but they were as tense as the rest of us. They moved with urgency, trying to comfort passengers while their own worries seeped through their professional facades. I could see the fear in their eyes, and it terrified me more than the storm outside. The captain spoke again, but his voice was different this time. I strained to catch the words. "We're experiencing some anomalies." Anomalies? Was he serious? I glanced around, wondering if others felt the same dread that gnawed at my insides. The briefcase man was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his skin. Then it happened. The plane lurched violently, and the engine sputtered. A collective scream tore through the cabin, echoing off the metal walls. I braced myself, envisioning the worst as panic spread like wildfire. My heart pounded in my ears as the lights flickered more violently, and for a moment, I thought we might fall from the sky. People were praying now, desperate whispers rising like smoke. I clutched my seat, praying for solid ground beneath me, but all I felt was the oppressive weight of fear. I scanned the cabin again, searching for something, anything, to anchor me in this spiraling nightmare. The briefcase man caught my eye, and we exchanged a look that spoke of a shared understanding. We were no longer just passengers, we were trapped in a nightmare. The growling noise returned, louder this time, and the lights went out completely. Darkness enveloped us, and the only sound was the thunder outside, mixing with the wails of terror. I had never been more afraid in my life. Was this how it was supposed to end? In a metal tube hurtling through the storm, lost and alone? My breath came in ragged gasps, and I fought against the rising tide of panic. Then, without warning, the cabin lights flickered back on, revealing chaos. A man at the front of the plane was on his feet, shouting incoherently. The flight attendants were trying to calm passengers, but their eyes betrayed them. They knew something was wrong. I could see it in their faces, but no one said it aloud. The plane shuddered again, and this time, I felt it in my bones, a sickening lurch that made my stomach drop. I was certain we were going down. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the armrests until my knuckles turned white. The sounds of the storm outside roared, and I felt the heat rise around me, a deceptive warmth that contrasted with the chilling fear enveloping my heart. Moments turned into eternity as I waited for the inevitable crash, but instead, the plane began to stabilize. The rumbling subsided, and I opened my eyes to see the cabin lights flickering back to life. Passengers around me were still in shock, their faces drawn and pale. We were alive, but at what cost? My gaze landed on the briefcase man, who now wore a look of confusion. The captain's voice returned, clearer this time. "We've regained control, but we'll be experiencing some continued turbulence." The words were meant to reassure, but I detected an urgency beneath them. The fight against the storm was not over, not by a long shot. I leaned back against my seat, trying to slow my racing heart. The fear was still palpable, hanging in the air like thick fog. With every passing second, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. No one spoke, no one moved. It felt like we were all trapped in a timeless moment, waiting for the next round of chaos to descend upon us. As the plane trembled again, I stared out into the endless blackness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, lurking just beyond the reach of the lightning's brief illumination. I wanted to believe it was just a storm, but deep down, I sensed there was something more, a presence that had boarded this flight with us, and it would not rest until it had taken what it wanted. Story 6, Trail of the Forgotten Souls. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced along the trail as I tightened the straps of my backpack. I had been hiking for hours, my legs already weary from the constant uphill. The towering pines loomed overhead like ancient sentinels, their trunks gnarled and twisted, whispering secrets in the wind. I had set out early that morning with the intent of reaching the summit by noon, but as the hours crept by, the sunlight began to wane, a reminder of the time I had unwittingly squandered. I should have turned back. I should have listened to the unease curling in my gut, that instinct whispering for me to retrace my steps. I had always enjoyed the solitude of nature, the solace it offered me from the chaos of city life, but today felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, thick and suffocating, as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. With a sigh mixed with frustration and determination, I pressed on, my boots crunching on the rocky path. The trail narrowed, the trees closing in around me, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers, weaving a canopy that darkened the world beneath. The chirping of birds had diminished, replaced by a haunting stillness that made me shiver. I forced the thought of turning back from my mind, convincing myself that I could make it to the top and then return before dark. The sunlight faded faster than I anticipated. Clouds rolled in, heavy and gray, blocking what little light remained. Gritting my teeth, I pressed forward, the thrill of the climb mixing with an undercurrent of dread. Each step felt heavier, the weight of my backpack pressing down as if it contained not just supplies but an unseen burden. Then, I heard a rustle off the trail, a quick movement in the underbrush. I paused, straining to listen, my heart racing. The sound was too close, too deliberate to ignore. It had to be an animal, I told myself. A deer, perhaps. I had seen tracks earlier, evidence of life in this quiet wilderness. Yet, the tension didn't ease. I felt watched, as if unseen eyes were studying my every move. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see someone lingering just out of sight. There was nothing. Just trees and shadows. I shook my head, attempting to rid myself of the encroaching paranoia. It was just the isolation getting to me. Continuing on, I became increasingly aware of the way the trees seemed to close in, the path twisting and turning in unnatural directions. I had thought I knew this trail well, familiar with the landmarks that marked the way, but everything felt foreign now. The rocks underfoot jutted out like bones, and I stumbled, catching myself on a tree trunk. A jagged edge of bark tore at my palm, a sharp pain snapping me back to reality. As I trekked onward, the wind picked up, howling through the pines. It carried with it a low, mournful sound that gave me pause. I strained to identify it, but it was like a whisper, slipping through my fingers. I quickened my pace, feeling the chill seep into my bones. The weight in my stomach grew heavier, an instinctive urge to flee that contrasted sharply with my desire to prove myself capable. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small clearing. It was a brief respite, a pocket of calm that offered a stunning view of the valley below, the fading light casting a warm glow. I paused to catch my breath, taking in the beauty around me. It almost made me forget the discomfort gnawing at the edges of my mind. But then I noticed a peculiar shape in the distance, half hidden behind the trees at the edge of the clearing. It didn't belong there, a dark silhouette stark against the fading light. I squinted, trying to comprehend the anomaly. My heart raced again, and I felt compelled to investigate, curiosity mingling dangerously with dread. As I approached, the outline came into focus, an old, dilapidated cabin, its wooden frame sagging as if it bore the weight of countless storms. Vines crept up its walls like fingers clawing for purchase. I hesitated, an overwhelming sense of foreboding washing over me. This place felt wrong, a dark stain in the otherwise vibrant wilderness. I fought against the instinct to turn away, though. I had come all this way, and perhaps there were answers to the unease that had been clinging to me since I stepped onto the trail. Clenching my bruised palm, I stepped closer, each creak of the derelict structure echoing in the stillness like a warning bell. The door hung ajar, a gaping mouth eager to swallow me whole. I peered inside, my breath hitching in my throat as shadows flickered and danced, half-formed shapes shifting in the corners. The air was stale and thick with the scent of mold and decay. Despite every rational thought telling me to run, I took a step inside, the floor creaking beneath my weight. What happened next was an unraveling of reality. The sounds of my footsteps echoed back, an ominous reminder that I was utterly alone. I scanned the dark corners, but all I saw were remnants of the past: a broken chair, a dusty table, and something that looked like a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The very walls seemed to pulse with history, stories trapped within their weathered timbers, waiting to be unearthed. Just as I reached for the journal, a sudden noise erupted from outside, a low growl, primal and guttural. My heart plummeted, a flash of terror coursing through me. I froze, the journal slipping from my fingers as I turned toward the door. I should have left. I should have listened to the whisper that had warned me. But now, it was too late. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth as I stepped out of the tent the following morning. My breath hung in the chill, mist curling in lazy tendrils around my face. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, muted light across the landscape. I had hoped that the serenity of the early hours would calm my mind, shake off the unease that had settled over me like a heavy fog. I was wrong. The night before, shadows had danced unnaturally in the woods, and every crack of a twig had sent my heart racing. I had dismissed it as paranoia, the product of an overactive imagination sparked by ghost stories and campfire tales. But now, standing at the edge of the forest, I felt something gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I glanced back at the tent, where Jenna still slept soundly, oblivious to the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. We had been friends for years, and this hiking trip was meant to strengthen our bond, a break from our hectic city lives. But the isolation of the mountains felt oppressive, as if the trees themselves were closing in on us. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and lukewarm coffee, I decided to make my way to the nearby stream while Jenna remained behind to rest. It was a familiar path, one I had walked 100 times in my mind while planning this trip. I wanted to enjoy the beauty of nature, to clear my head. Perhaps the sound of flowing water would drown out my lingering fears. The trail was narrow, lined with thick underbrush that snagged at my clothing. The distant chirping of birds was a reminder that life persisted outside my worries. I followed the path deeper into the woods, but as I walked, the sunlight dwindled, swallowed by the looming trees. Each step felt heavier, a weight I couldn't shake. About halfway to the stream, I noticed something odd. A series of small stones were arranged in a pattern, leading off the path and into the thicket. I stopped to study them, my curiosity piqued despite the prickling sensation climbing up my spine. They were too deliberate to be a natural occurrence, but I couldn't fathom what purpose they served. Ignoring the instinct screaming at me to turn back, I followed the stones deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to shift around me, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. As I ventured further, the air grew stale, thick with an unspeakable dread. It felt wrong, like I had stumbled into a realm where the rules of nature were rewritten. The stones led me to a clearing, and I gasped as I took in the sight before me. In the center stood a crude wooden effigy, a grotesque amalgamation of branches and twigs. Its twisted form resembled a person, but the features were distorted, almost mocking. Beneath it lay a scattering of dark, dried leaves that looked suspiciously like something more sinister. I took a step back, fear clawing at my throat. I was about to turn back when a rustling sound emerged from the underbrush. My heart raced as I scanned the area, searching for the source. The sound was low and intermittent, like something or someone was moving just out of sight. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the eerie rustle continued. A chill swept through me, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. Without conscious thought, I turned and bolted back the way I had come, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The path seemed longer on the return, the trees closing in around me. I stumbled through the underbrush, my hands brushing against the rough bark as I fought to keep my balance. Every shadow seemed to leap forward, every whisper of wind became a sinister laugh. I wanted to scream for Jenna, but I feared what might happen if I revealed my panic. When I finally burst back onto the main trail, I nearly tripped over a root as I sped toward the tent. My breath came in ragged gasps, the panic not yet ebbing from my veins. I threw the flap open. "Jenna." She stirred, blinking sleepily at me, confusion crossing her face. "What's wrong?" "I found something out there." I struggled to find the words, but all I could see was the effigy, the stones, the sense of being watched. "We need to leave." She sat up, concern etched into her features. "What do you mean?" "It's just a hike, right? It's not safe." I don't know how to explain it. I could hear my own voice quaking. There's something in those woods. I felt it. Jenna's brow furrowed as she took in my frantic state. "Okay, let's just take a breath and think this through. We can't just pack up and leave without a plan. Why don't we head back to the trail, Anne?" "No!" I interrupted, my voice rising in desperation. "We can't stay here. Please, just trust me." A shadow crossed her face, and I could see her uncertainty. She hesitated, and for a moment, the silence between us felt like an abyss. But then she nodded slowly, her expression shifting from fear to determination. "All right, let's pack up." As we gathered our things, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond the tree line. The forest felt alive, a sentient being aware of our every move. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had watched me in the woods was still watching. With our gear hastily packed, we stepped out of the tent, the woods wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. I felt the click of paranoia in my mind, a cold sweat sliding down my back. This was supposed to be an adventure, a time to reconnect. Instead, it felt like we were being hunted. "We'll stick to the trail," Jenna said, her voice steady despite the tension threading between us. "We'll be fine." But as we started walking, the oppressive silence of the forest closed in around us. I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the shift in the air that spoke of something waiting just beyond the trees. I knew then that this hike was only the beginning of something much darker, a descent into a nightmare I couldn't yet comprehend. The air had a different quality the morning after the storm. It hung heavy and damp, clinging to my skin like a shroud as I emerged from my tent. The remnants of last night's tempest had left the surrounding forest eerily silent, the only sounds being the occasional drip of water from saturated leaves. I could see patches of blue sky peeking through the dense canopy above, but the beauty of the moment felt oddly suffocating. My companions were still asleep, their forms bundled in sleeping bags, oblivious to the tension that seemed to thrum beneath the surface of the woods. Normally, I would have welcomed the tranquility, but the silence felt oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I decided to explore a bit, needing to shake off the growing unease that gripped me. As I navigated through the damp underbrush, the ground squished under my boots, releasing a pungent earthy smell. I stayed close to the path we had forged the day before, though it was barely visible through the fallen leaves and scattered twigs. The trail twisted deeper into the forest, beckoning me with its unknowns. I felt an inexplicable pull, as if someone wanted me to go further, to lose myself in the wilderness. After walking for what felt like an hour, I stumbled upon a clearing. The sunlight bathed the area in an ethereal glow, and I found myself momentarily enchanted by the sight. Wildflowers danced in the soft breeze, and I could hear the soft trickle of a nearby stream. I knelt down to wash my hands in the cool water, the sensation revitalizing my senses. But an unsettling feeling crept in as I glanced around the clearing. I was alone, far too alone. In that moment, I remembered stories I had heard as a child. Cautionary tales of the woods that spoke of lost hikers and ancient spirits. My heart quickened, and I stood up, ready to return to my camp. It was a decision I should have made sooner. As I turned, I sensed it, the feeling of being watched. I looked back, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Just shadows. With a quickened pace, I made my way back along the path, my breath echoing in the stillness. I rounded a bend and froze, my blood running cold at the sight before me. A figure stood at the edge of the trail, obscured by the thick trunks of the trees. It was a woman, her long hair tangled and matted, her clothes tattered and muddy. But what struck me most was her face, pale, gaunt, and stretched in a grimace that seemed to be fixed in a perpetual scream, devoid of sound. I took instinctive steps back, my heart pounding violently in my chest. The woman didn't move, only watched me with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I turned and fled, kicking up leaves and branches as I sprinted back to camp. The world blurred around me. The only thought in my mind was the desperate need to reach safety. I arrived breathless, my lungs burning as I burst into the clearing where my friends were just stirring awake. They looked at me, concern etched on their faces. "What's wrong?" Andy asked, his brow furrowed. I struggled to find the words, my voice trembling. There was a woman in the woods. She looked. I couldn't finish. The image of her gaunt face haunted me. "Probably just a trick of the light or something," Lisa said, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "You've been hiking too long. We all feel it." But I knew what I had seen. The image of that woman lingered like a dark stain on my memory. I could almost feel her eyes still on me, an unshakable weight pressing down on my shoulders. I could sense the shift in the air, a subtle yet palpable change in the atmosphere, as if the forest itself was conspiring against us. "Let's move on," I suggested, trying to mask my rising panic. "We shouldn't stay in one place for too long." The group exchanged glances, a mixture of confusion and concern swirling among them. Finally, they nodded, packing up the campsite in uneasy silence. As we walked further down the trail, I forced myself to focus on the scenery, the gnarled roots, the towering trees, the way the light filtered through the leaves. I wanted to believe that we were safe, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Forcing laughter, I recounted my encounter, embellishing the details to make it seem lighthearted. But my heart was not in it. Each step felt heavier, and the shadows deepened around us. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. The deeper we went, the more I felt a sense of foreboding grow. The trees closed in around us, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. I could feel us watching from the darkness, but when I looked, there was nothing, just the rustling leaves and the distant calls of wildlife. Night began to fall, casting long shadows that danced around us. "We should find a place to camp soon," said Sarah, her voice a whisper. I could hear the tremor in her words, echoing my own fears. The forest felt alive with secrets, and the stories I had dismissed now clawed at the corners of my mind. As we set up camp, my heart raced with every snap of a twig or flicker of movement in the underbrush. I lay restless in my sleeping bag, the moonlight filtering through the trees, casting ghostly shapes all around. The memories of the woman haunted my thoughts, and I struggled to convince myself it had been an illusion. Then I heard it. A soft rustle, a faint whisper. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The others were still asleep, but my heart thundered in my ears. Was it just the wind? Or something else, something that lurked in the shadows of the trees? My gaze darted around, scanning the darkness outside the flickering campfire. The rustling grew more distinct, almost purposeful, as if something was moving closer. I strained my ears, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. Then I saw it, a figure, just beyond the reach of the firelight. The same haunting presence from earlier, watching me with that same ghastly expression, but now it was not merely a specter. It stepped forward, emerging from the shadows, and I felt my heart stop. It was too late to turn back now. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting an intricate web of shadows across the forest floor. I stood on the trail, my breath visible in the crisp air, the damp earth squelching beneath my boots. The beautiful dawn belied the grim reality of my situation. It had been 2 days since I'd lost sight of Mike, my hiking partner, and the weight of his absence pressed down on me like the thick mist that clung to the trees. I had called for him repeatedly, my voice slicing through the silence of the woods, but the only response came from the rustling of branches and the distant sound of a crow cawing, as if mocking my despair. I felt small in the vastness of the forest, a mere speck among the towering pines and receding trails. Every so often, I stopped to listen intently, hoping to hear a reply or the echo of footsteps, but the stillness held sway like an omnipotent force. Determined to find Mike, I continued along the trail, glancing over my shoulder more often than I liked. The gnawing feeling in my gut had grown since he disappeared. A familiar unease, one that had nestled deep within me before we ever set foot on this path, was now a constant companion. The story I had dismissed as legend, the one about the woods swallowing things whole, seemed more tangible with each step I took. A chill skittered down my spine, and I hesitated, scanning the trees. Dappled sunlight broke through the canopy intermittently, illuminating patches of underbrush, but the shadows remained thicker than comfort would allow. I recalled the accounts of hikers vanishing without a trace, stories my father used to tell around campfires, blending adventure with a chilling warning. The irony was not lost on me. I had scoffed at those tales as a child, and now I felt them creeping into the recesses of my mind. As I pressed on, the trail grew narrower, the ground more uneven. I pushed aside a low-hanging branch and stumbled into a small clearing. A rusted 𝐾𝐭 lay discarded among the foliage, and I knelt to examine it, hoping to find a clue to Mike's whereabouts. But as I brushed the dirt away, a sudden movement caught my eye. I glanced up just in time to see a shadow dart behind a nearby tree. My heart raced. Was it Mike? My instinct screamed at me to call out, but a primal fear silenced my voice. I waited, straining to hear anything, a footfall, a whisper. Instead, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting alongside me. The moment stretched into eternity, and I finally decided to approach the tree, my footsteps soft against the ground. It felt wrong to move forward. Every instinct told me to go back, to retrace my steps to the last safe point. Yet the desperate hope of finding Mike urged me to continue. I rounded the tree, only to find nothing but the warped bark and a carpet of fallen leaves. Frustration bubbled within me. I clenched my fists, nearly screaming Mike's name again. But I swallowed it down, forcing myself to breathe. I had to remain calm, to think clearly. I turned to scan the other side of the clearing when something caught my eye, a tattered piece of fabric snagged on a branch. I stepped closer, my heart thrumming. As I reached for it, I recognized the colors. It was part of Mike's jacket, the one he had almost lost on our last hike. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, fear and anger intertwining like vines as I yanked the fabric free. Mike! I shouted, the sound tearing through the quiet. Are you here? Silence enveloped me again, deeper this time, as if the forest itself was swallowing my call. I clenched the fabric, panic rising in my throat. The decision came unbidden. I would search deeper. I had to. Following the faint trail, I soon found myself ambling up a steep incline. The underbrush thickened, tugging at my clothes and slowing my movements. My pulse quickened as I thought of Mike, imagining him lost and afraid. I'm coming for you, I whispered, as if the promise could carry him my way. As I climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and the forest around me darkened, the trees now looming like sentinels. I pulled my flashlight from my pack, its beam cutting through the shadows like a desperate lifeline. The light danced over twisted roots and gnarled branches, and for a moment, I felt almost in control, as if I could illuminate the truth hiding in the darkness. Then, I heard it. A soft rustling, so quiet it could have been mistaken for wind, but I was certain it was movement. It came from my right, just beyond the beam of my light. I turned slowly, heart thudding against my ribs as dread pulled in my stomach. "Mike?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. The rustling ceased abruptly, plunging me into silence once again. I strained my ears, the forest giving nothing away. I took a tentative step forward, the light flickering slightly as I aimed it toward the sound. The beam illuminated a gap in the trees, a darker void where the undergrowth seemed to swallow the light. There was something about that space that set my nerves on fire. It felt wrong, like an open mouth ready to devour. I took another step, compelled by an invisible thread. And then, just as I reached the edge of the opening, a soft, raspy voice broke through the air. "Help!" It was a whisper, yet it echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. "Mike?" I shouted into the void, panic tightening around my throat. "Is that you?" The reply was a low, guttural laugh that sent a shock of ice skimming along my spine. "Help," it repeated, but the tone was wrong, taunting, sinister. I stumbled back, my heart hammering as the shadows seemed to elongate, warping the trees into grotesque shapes. The forest closed in around me, the once familiar trail forgotten as I turned to flee. I tore through the brush, branches clawing at my skin, desperate to escape whatever fiend lay waiting in that darkened space. As I ran, I could hear it behind me, a rustling, a whisper. The forest felt alive, the very trees conspiring against me, drawing me deeper into the darkness. I could not let it win. I had to find Mike. I had to find a way out. But no matter how fast I ran, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, leaving me lost in a nightmarish maze with no end in sight. The chill of dawn hung in the air like a shroud, wrapping around me as I stepped out of the tent. I hadn't slept much, tormented by the nightmares that had seeped into my subconscious. I could still feel the oppressive weight of those eyes watching me, even in the relative safety of my small shelter. The woods, silent and foreboding, felt alive with unseen dangers as I surveyed my surroundings. I had been hiking for 3 days now, deeper into the heart of the Blackwood Forest, a place locals warned against for more reasons than I could count. Yet, here I was, determined to push through. I needed to confront whatever it was that had been haunting my dreams. I had come into these woods hoping to find solace, but instead, I felt like prey being stalked by something ancient and hungry. After a quick breakfast, I packed my gear with a lingering sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being coaxed deeper into the forest by some malevolent force. The foliage crackled beneath my boots as I made my way along the narrow path, the mist swirling around my ankles like ghostly fingers reaching for me. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness, amplifying my paranoia. The first hour went by uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every rustle of leaves or snapping of twigs sent my heart racing. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, the remnant of my fevered dreams, but the sensation was too palpable to ignore. I stopped to take a breath, to center myself, but the air thickened around me, as if the forest was holding its breath in anticipation. I arrived at a clearing marked by an ancient tree, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Something about the tree drew me in, almost magnetically. I approached it, running my fingers over the rough bark, and squinted at the carvings embedded within. They appeared to be initials, but not just any initials. Some were intertwined with strange symbols, pulsing with a dark energy that I couldn't quite define. I felt a chill travel down my spine, a warning bell echoing in my mind that urged me to turn back. But I needed to keep going. I had read about hikers disappearing in these woods, lost souls claimed by the shadows. I wondered if they had been drawn to this same spot. The urge to uncover the mystery wrapped around the tree was overpowering. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, hoping to document the strange carvings, but the screen flickered and then went black. I cursed under my breath, trying to reboot it, but nothing worked. It was as though the tree had absorbed the very essence of my device, leaving me marooned in my own fear. I pressed on, the forest growing denser, the path narrowing with each step. The canopy overhead thickened, blocking out the sun and casting everything into twilight. The shadows stretched and twisted, playing tricks on my mind. I could have sworn I heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, curling around me like smoke. I quickened my pace, heart pounding louder than the whispers. Then, I saw a flash of movement to my left. My instinct was to run, but something rooted me in place. I forced myself to look, squinting into the underbrush. A figure emerged, the outline of a man shrouded in shadow. He stood still, watching me with eyes that glinted like shards of ice. A cold fear gripped my heart as I held his gaze. Who was he? A fellow hiker lost like me, or something worse? "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. I could barely respond, my throat tightening with every passing second. Something about him felt wrong, like he didn't belong in this world. I'm just hiking," I stammered, unsure of my own words. "Many come here for solace," he continued, stepping closer. "But the forest does not give easily what it takes." A shiver ran through me. The last part of his statement echoed with the same ominous tone I'd heard in my dreams. I took a step back, instinctively feeling for the knife I kept in my pack. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows," he said cryptically, a tight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Be careful of the paths you take. Some lead to freedom, others to despair." His words hung heavy in the air, making my skin crawl. I turned to flee, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of him vanishing into the underbrush, leaving no trace behind. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The forest felt alive, the trees shifting as if they were whispering secrets to one another. I began to run, the fear propelling me forward, branches clawing at my skin, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I needed to find my way back, but every direction felt alien. I pushed deeper into the woods, the shadows closing in around me, suffocating me in their embrace. I could hear the whispers again, this time clearer, chanting my name with a haunting familiarity. They seemed to come from all directions, echoing through the trees. I stumbled, my foot catching on a root. I fell to the ground, gasping, trying to orient myself. The world spun around me as I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through my veins. In that moment of vulnerability, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was utterly alone. The forest stood still, but I could sense it shifting around me, as if it was breathing. I felt its weight pressing down on my shoulders, urging me toward an inescapable fate. I had ventured too far, and now, the tight grip of the woods was clenching around me, refusing to let go. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices beckoning me deeper into the darkness. There would be no solace here, only the uncertainty of what lay ahead, lurking just beyond the trees.